Chapter 191 How to Train Your Dragon 2. In the Hogwarts library, Asterion, Rose, Luna, and Cedric were together. Looking at the baby dragon walking beneath Asterion, Rose couldn't help but widen her eyes. Without hesitation, she picked up the hatchling with her hands and lifted it, staring at the dragon with a strange expression. Asti. Rose turned to look at Asterion. You didn't give the dragon juice, did you? I mean, he looks like a bodybuilder with all those strong muscles. That's not normal for a hatchling. Rose remarked in a bewildered tone. What kind of hatchling is born with muscles? None. In her mind, Asterion must have injected the poor hatchling with juice and ordered it to train relentlessly. Rose also noticed the color of the scales and horns, which didn't belong to a newborn of the Hebridean black breed. Normally, their scales are black and their eyes purple. But the hatchling before her had dark red-black scales and an imposing crown of horns, still growing. This was definitely not supposed to happen in a Hebridean black. In the books she had recently read, the Hebridean black hatchling didn't resemble this one at all. Luna and Cedric also glanced curiously at Asterion. There was no denying it, the baby dragon was truly eye-catching. Faced with the accusing and confused looks of his teammates, Asterion responded calmly, it was born like this. I had nothing to do with its mutation. His heartbeat didn't even speed up as he blatantly lied to his teammates. Rose, Luna, and Cedric, hearing his words, rolled their eyes and focused on petting the little dragon. Even though it seemed like Asterion wasn't lying, they didn't believe a single word that came out of his mouth. There was no way such a huge mutation could occur naturally. Unbothered by whether they believed him or not, Asterion sat down while watching the three of them touch the baby dragon indiscriminately. Does he have a name yet? Luna asked, stroking its scales, which felt warm to the touch, almost as if they were made of fire. Ancalagon, Asterion replied without hesitation, honoring his dragon with the name of the most terrible and famous dragon he knew. Ancalagon midline horizontal ellipsis, Luna murmured to herself as she looked at the harmless little dragon. Suddenly, Luna's eyes began to shine, and an emotionless voice escaped her lips, loud enough for everyone around to hear clearly. You will be the one who brings his death midline horizontal ellipsis, and from your body, he will emerge as something else, a monster in the eyes of the world. It was a short, simple phrase, yet filled with mystery. Asterion looked at Luna, frowning. Luna's phrase had too many variables. But the main message was that Ancalagon would kill someone, and from his body, someone would be reborn to become a monster. He had a pretty good idea of who that person was. That was why Asterion hated prophecies, always so vague and overly dramatic. After a while, he stopped caring about the prophecy Luna had given. Asterion didn't want to be another fool who, in trying to prevent the prophecy from coming true, ended up fulfilling it through his own actions. It was so stupid that he didn't even want to think about the prophecy, preferring to forget it existed in the first place. Honestly, the idea of killing Ancalagon crossed his mind and didn't go away. He'd rather kill him than deal with such a massive headache in the future. Breaking the silence, Rose asked with a hint of uncertainty, are we going to talk about the prophecy or not? Luna looked at Rose and replied in a sincere tone, it's better to forget what you heard, nothing good ever comes when a prophecy is involved. It wasn't the first time she had prophesied something, nor would it be the last. She had small prophecies weekly, but this kind of prophecy, involving the entire world, was a first for her. As a seer, She knew that just trying to unravel the prophecy could be its trigger, so Luna shared Asterion's view: pretend it never happened and forget it. Cedric, standing beside them, also nodded in agreement with Luna's words. It's best not to meddle with the future, focusing on the present is always the most realistic option. Rose thought for a moment and also nodded in agreement. She was someone who thought logically due to her 6 eyes. She saw the world based on information and data, not on some ridiculous future that may or may not exist. However, they all agreed on one thing: Ancalagon was no ordinary baby dragon. No creature capable of sparking a prophecy could be considered normal or simple. Unfortunately, you can't help me hatch my own team's egg. Cedric broke the silence between them, causing Luna to nod helplessly at the situation of hatching her own egg. This was a rule established for the second task: everyone must hatch their own eggs without assistance, even from their own team. It was a measure to avoid having more than 40 dragons flying on the day of the race. Rose wasn't worried. She could use a fire spell and raise the temperature as much as she wanted, gaining huge amounts of magical energy. But neither Cedric nor Luna had that privilege. Sitting down, Cedric commented with a bitter tone in his voice, "Honestly, if I weren't afraid of losing points for Hogwarts, I'd want to drop out of this task. I'm sure I can't handle a Hungarian horntail." There was no way. This task was far too hostile for him. He didn't have the necessary skills to hatch the egg in the first place, and even if the hatchling was born, how in Merlin's name was he going to tame one of the most aggressive dragons on the planet? It wasn't a dog that you fed, and it would bond with you. It was a damn dragon, extremely territorial and full of hostility towards anyone who stood in its way. No matter. With the victory in the King's game, Hogwarts has 10 points, about 3 more than the second-place team, the French. "Even if you fail, it won't hurt us too much," Rose tried to comfort the Hufflepuff representative, or at least, that's what she thought she was doing. Cedric's face turned embarrassed at Rose's words. What she said was essentially telling him that he was useless and that his presence wouldn't be missed in the tournament. Puff, Luna couldn't resist and began to laugh. It was a bright, cheerful laugh that completely changed the atmosphere. "Rose, I suggest you let other people comfort Cedric. You're definitely not good at consoling anyone with your words. He should feel honored to receive comforting words from the great and amazing Rose Potter," Rose said in a playful tone as she straightened up proudly. "Silence is sometimes the greatest blessing a man can ask for," Asterion subtly criticized Rose, causing the white-haired girl to glare at him rather unpleasantly. Luna rested her head in her hand and looked at her teammates with a gentle and surprisingly happy expression. She was grateful to have these 3 as companions. The life of a seer wasn't easy. Knowing that her own mother was going to die even before it happened, and failing to save her, had made Luna's already fragile mind extremely unstable. Add to that the fear people have of a seer, and you get an insecure and crazy child in the eyes of many. Luna never thought that even after revealing her gift to her companions, she would be accepted without much difficulty or even prejudice towards her ability. Maybe it was because Rose and Asterion were crazy in their own way and never cared about her madness, and Cedric was just a guy with a heart of gold in a world where power spoke louder than anything else. Luna thanked whoever had brought them together as friends. Loneliness was something extremely terrible for some, and it was especially cruel for her. She was sure that many people would have been frightened by her gift and would have distanced themselves from her at some point. Not everyone could handle her quirks or overcome their fear of the unknown. Chapter 192 How to Train Your Dragon 3. An intense smell of burning lingered in the air, while the scorched black color covered every surface Rose looked at. The aftermath of a very powerful fire spell, causing damage even to the magic-resistant stones that Hogwarts had been built with 1,000 years ago. Crack! With a loud and clear sound in a secluded part of Hogwarts, Rose watched as a small, scaly gray head broke through the hard shell of the egg. The red eyes seemed full of innocence, gazing at the surroundings with pure curiosity. A moment later, the entire egg exploded into small pieces, scattering around, revealing the winged, metallic gray-scaled creature. It didn't appear larger than a domestic cat, although even as a hatchling, it could tear through flesh with its extremely sharp teeth. Rose smiled at the Ironbelly hatchling before her, the creature staring at her and baring its teeth. Ignoring the threatening look from the baby dragon, she picked it up in her arms and left one of the many vacant rooms in Hogwarts. As soon as she stepped out of the room, leaving behind a completely charred space, Rose came face to face with a woman dressed in emerald robes, her features stern and unyielding. Minerva McGonagall. Miss Potter. Minerva greeted her student and glanced at the baby dragon in Rose's arms with a hint of interest. Turning her gaze to the room Rose had just exited, the Transfiguration professor's face darkened instantly upon seeing the state of it. Professor McGonagall. Rose couldn't help but feel a bit embarrassed under Minerva's accusatory stare. She really hadn't expected to see her favorite professor at that moment. Sighing, Minerva rubbed her eyebrows and looked at Rose. "Walk with me, Miss Potter." Rose nodded and walked alongside the older woman. She couldn't help but glance at Minerva. If there was anyone who had taken care of her during her time at Hogwarts, it was this woman. Even after just over a year together, Minerva had become someone irreplaceable to her. Her advice, her answers to Rose's doubts, and even her responses to personal, feminine concerns had all come from this woman. She was almost like a mother, only a little older. "What are you thinking about in silence?" Minerva asked, noticing Rose's unusual quietness. The girl was typically exceptionally loud at all times. "I'm thinking about making a potion to purify this little guy's bloodline," Rose responded calmly, her eyes gazing at the Ironbelly in her arms. The little one didn't seem happy at all about being held, constantly trying to bite her, which obviously failed because of her innate technique. Minerva couldn't help but look at Rose with a touch of surprise, the image of a red-haired girl overlapping with that of the white-haired one before her. "You really do look like your mother, Rose," Minerva commented in a sad and regretful tone. If she had arrived sooner, perhaps the Potters wouldn't have died. Rose stopped walking for a moment at her words, but soon resumed with a complicated expression. "What was my mother like?" Rose asked, her tone softer than usual. Lily was a lively girl. She never stopped getting into trouble between Gryffindor and Slytherin, always defending her friends with a fierceness that reminded me of a lion, Minerva replied, a smile appearing on her lips as she remembered Lily Evans. She had a rare talent for potions, something you only see once in hundreds of years. She was always coming up with new recipes with her brilliant and unusual mind. Once, she created a potion that made animals talk, and believe me, it wasn't a pleasant experience. Imagine how many neutered cats were furious when they became aware of their condition, Minerva said with a playful tone, looking at Rose. Rose couldn't help but laugh at hearing about the potion her mother had created. From Minerva's words, she could imagine her mother being a version of Luna, though more protective and with a few screws loose. After all, Who in their right mind would think of creating such a potion? If you'd like, I can give you some of the notes your mother entrusted to me, Minerva offered in a very gentle tone, something she wouldn't do for just anyone, only those she trusted. But Lily's daughter deserved to see that side of her. Rose's eyes sparkled at Minerva's words, and she nodded, thanking her sincerely. Thank you, it will really help me with creating my bloodline purification potion. She hoped her mother's notes would guide her before the race officially began in 4 days. Minerva nodded and added, Albus became famous for his 12 uses of dragon's blood. You can ask for a copy of his notes, they will certainly help with the potion you're trying to create. Rose agreed with Minerva, and the two walked side by side, chatting about more mundane things. In the Gryffindor girls' dormitory, Rose was holding a red diary in good condition. The first sentence written inside made Rose's heart race, and a smile tugged at her lips. Notes and Experiences in Potions by Lily Evans, the most incredible potion maker. Her mother really did resemble her in some ways. The first thing I was taught when making potions was to follow the recipe. This wouldn't be wrong if you didn't want to dive deep into the complex field of potion making. However, if you wish to become a potions master, you must set aside all recipes and experiment with each magical property for yourself. Only then will you take the first step toward becoming a potions master. But above all, you must have money and connections to follow this path. If it weren't for Professor McGonagall's support, I wouldn't be where I am today, despite the talent I possess. The wizarding world is a cruel place for someone like me, who wasn't born to magical parents, without inheritance or money. Someone at the bottom of the extremely rigid caste hierarchy of England. Rose couldn't help but think her mother was very realistic for someone so young. She apparently didn't only see the glamour of the wizarding world like most Muggleborns. She saw the cold and indifferent reality for Muggleborns. Did my mother marry my father because of this? This was a question Rose had asked herself after learning that her mother had no interest in James Potter before their final year at Hogwarts. In her eyes, her mother had married her father because of the inheritance of the Potter house. Even if there was love after the marriage, she hadn't married James out of love. After all, given her father's childish personality and the bullying he inflicted on his classmates, James definitely wasn't that attractive to Lily. These thoughts stirred mixed feelings in her heart, but could Rose criticize her mother's choice? The answer was a resounding no. As the future matriarch of the Potter house, she had already realized how many benefits she had due to her noble birth. It was as if all doors were open to her, a privilege her mother didn't have because of her Muggle-born status. Rose could imagine that the English wizarding world had likely stripped away all the glamour and stories that had been told to Lily Potter. Rose shook her head to clear these thoughts and focused on reading her mother's notes. Through her words written in the diary, the image of her mother became clearer and clearer in her mind, her personality, her desire to become someone important in the world, and above all, her love for potions. Compared to her father, whom she had read about in the Potter house records, the two were completely different. James Potter was the typical spoiled boy from a noble house, born with a silver spoon in his mouth and excessively pampered by his grandparents, who had him at an old age. Chapter 193 How to Train Your Dragon 4. With Rose's dragon egg hatching and the day of the race drawing closer, more and more dragons were emerging from their respective eggs. It's noticeable that, unlike in the original world of Harry Potter, dragons grow much faster here. Fast enough that, within a few days, most dragons could already be ridden, though they were not very fast due to their young age. The largest dragon belonged to Asterion. Ancalagon was the size of 3 horses, appearing as a truly imposing and powerful dragon. In the future, he would honor his namesake from another universe. His crown of horns seemed particularly intimidating. No one could compare Ancalagon to the Hebridean Black, the breed of the dragon. They looked completely different. Because they were dragons, all participants, along with their dragons, could not remain at Hogwarts. As a result, a small village was established at the foot of Hogwarts. For those who managed to force the hatching of dragon eggs, they now faced a more difficult challenge, controlling a fast-growing dragon, ravenously hungry, especially thirsty for meat and blood. At that moment, in the new village below Hogwarts, a young man could be seen running with all his strength, fear painting his face in an almost morbid pallor. Behind him, a dragon flew in pursuit, its beastly purple eyes filled with hunger and a ferocity worthy of one of the world's most powerful predators. "Help!" The young man shouted loudly, barely dodging a charge from the dragon behind him. He didn't have his wand in hand, showing that he had fled in a rush, running from the dragon. Despite his cries for help and the fact that the houses were all relatively close, no one came out to aid the young man being chased by the dragon. Another idiot who thought taming a dragon is like taming a dog with treats. Does he think he's some kind of Viking who likes dragons? Asterion remarked through the window with a look of disgust. In his eyes, witches and wizards should be intelligent and studious. What's the difference between magical animals and wizards without knowledge? None. Both are stupid animals in that case. Although she didn't understand Asterion's last words, Daphne, dressed only in her fiancé's long shirt, sat beside him with a steaming cup of hot chocolate in her hands, sipping the warm liquid with a small, comfortable smile playing on her lips. Knowing that Asterion would be living outside the castle for a period of time, as his legitimate fiancé, Daphne naturally went to live with him, and she admitted it was the best choice she had ever made. The two lived alone in this cozy wooden house, which she had personally decorated down to the smallest details, with all the love she could muster. Although it wasn't a mansion full of opulence like she was used to, she felt strangely content every time she looked at the house she shared with Asterion. This house was a world that belonged to her, Asterion, and another girl with white hair. It was as if they were already husband and wife. Unfortunately, this calm and peace were soon shattered by the agonizing scream of the young man outside. Daphne curiously looked out the window and saw a Hungarian horntail dragon biting down on the young man with its monstrous mouth and teeth sharper than daggers. Judging by the agonizing expression on his face, the pain was far from ordinary, otherwise, his scream wouldn't have resembled that of a pig being cruelly slaughtered. "I give up," the young man screamed hysterically as he desperately tried to pull back, which was a terrible decision on his part, given that the dragon was still feasting on his arm. This made the young man's expression even more pained than before. When the young man shouted that he was giving up on the competition, Asterion and Daphne watched as Professor McGonagall waved her hand. With a simple gesture, the dragon was bound in chains made of iron. Everything was done with such mastery and experience that no student could have achieved it. With great care, she pried open the dragon's mouth and carefully removed the shredded, broken arm, with many parts chewed between the dragon's teeth. Shaking her head as she saw the tragic state of the arm, the Transfiguration Master helped the young man get to the Hogwarts infirmary. As for the dragon, it was taken away by a team dressed in red, who seemed very skilled at handling the winged beasts. In less than 5 minutes, the dragon had been secured in a tough metal crate and disappeared from everyone's sight along with the wizards and witches. Dragon keepers in the dragon reserves are very professional. The dragon barely resisted, though that was largely thanks to Professor McGonagall's transfiguration, Daphne commented, observing the scene with great interest. Asterion, beside her, agreed with his fiancée's words. They were truly professionals at what they did. This wasn't the first time they had seen these experts at work. The young man who had been attacked by the dragon wasn't the first, there had been 2 others before him. Fools who thought they could earn the respect and love of dragons as if they were docile dogs. As for how other wizards and witches were managing to control their dragons, Asterion didn't know. It was a secret no participant could share, so as not to help their enemies. However, according to Luna, some used potions with hallucinogenic or confusion effects, and some even used amortentia. When Asterion heard that someone had used the strongest love potion in existence on a dragon, his expression turned strange. The image was so disturbing that he wanted to rip his brain out. As for Luna herself, she had used an ancient ritual that existed in her family, and with her own blood as the primary material, she created a bond that allowed her to connect mentally with the dragon, making them practically one, which greatly increased the dragon's loyalty. However, an ancient and outdated ritual like this had some rather serious flaws. Imagine sharing a mind with a dragon. Definitely, strange scenarios would occur during the process, and that's exactly what happened. The dragon's personality became somewhat similar to Luna's. Since Luna was a vegetarian, the dragon also developed a dislike for meat, giving birth to the world's first vegetarian dragon. When Asterion heard Luna's words, he glanced at the sleepy dragon beside her and contorted his lips at such unreal news. Asterion was certain that Luna had done the entire ritual on purpose. It was her little revenge, retaliating for the torture she had suffered at the hands of Albion, who was still sealed away. He could already imagine the expression on the ancient dragon's face when it heard about the vegetarian dragon. There would be fury, anger, and even more fury in the eyes of the dragon that had terrorized Britain thousands of years ago, something Asterion wanted to witness from the front row. After all, Albion was his pig on a silver platter, served to him to complete his plan. Just as Daphne was about to speak, the door to the house opened, and Rose, with her head held high in triumph, walked in with a proud expression. "Dear husband and beloved wife, I'm back from work," Rose said in a playful tone, a smile dancing on her lips. "That damned supervisor made me work overtime," she complained loudly while pretending to hang a coat in the closet, her voice dripping with hatred and anger toward her work supervisor. Asterion and Daphne rolled their eyes at Rose's obvious act, as she appeared to be playing the role of the husband who had come home exhausted from a long day of work. "What are you two up to?" Rose asked as she sprawled inelegantly on the couch, resting her head on Asterion's lap. Watching another idiot almost get killed by a dragon, Daphne responded with almost visible pleasure in her voice, referring to the pain the fools had suffered when they were nearly killed by their own arrogance and stupidity. Rose nodded. She had initially considered going down that path, but after seeing her dragon's temper, she quickly abandoned those innocent thoughts and taught her dragon Hatchling the true fist of love. In her words to the dragon, it was submission or death. The death part was an exaggeration, but how could a not-so-intelligent dragon hatchling know that? Rose soon realized that dragons were, above all else, proud creatures. Even after dozens of beatings, which would have infuriated any animal rights organization, and rightly so, the dragon hatchling still seemed proud and didn't appear to be giving in any time soon. This led Rose to take drastic measures. She had to teach the hatchling the true fist of love. After hours of beatings. Training, Rose managed to establish a master-subordinate relationship. Suddenly, Rose felt a hand stroking her hair and couldn't help but let out a contented sigh. She looked up and saw Asterion gently running his fingers through her hair while focusing on reading a book. Rose had to admit, their relationship wasn't the most orthodox in the world, but she liked it just the way it was. Little by little, she was becoming part of this family. A family that consisted of just the three of them, and no one else. Chapter 194 How to Train Your Dragon 5. Along with Asterion, Daphne, Rose, Luna and Cedric were present at his house. Daphne served 2 cups of tea and a plate with some snacks to eat to both guests, who accepted after thanking her. The weather was getting colder and colder as Christmas approached. The Hufflepuff representative clearly had a melancholy expression. The reason for the melancholy was in the young man's arms: a dragon egg. It was the last day of the first phase of the second trial of the tournament and Cedric's dragon egg hadn't hatched, and even if it did, a dragon cub couldn't be ridden. Although my house didn't say anything, even supported me, the other houses don't think the same way. Cedric commented with a helpless expression on his face. It was the first time in his life that he had suffered such looks and words from his own schoolmates. Since Cedric hadn't managed to make the dragon egg hatch successfully even at the last moment, he had practically become something to be criticized in the eyes of the other 3 Hogwarts houses. This made him see for the first time how different people were in the face of a different reality. You don't have to worry about talking to those people, Cedric, just ignore them and hold your head up high with pride. You're in the tournament and they're not. It's just jealousy and they're taking advantage of the moment to criticize you. Rose said, comforting her friend with an expression of understanding. She knew how horrible people could be when something they didn't like came up in front of them. Asterion and Daphne also gave her looks of silent comfort. What are we going to do? We're 1 down, the other teams are probably thanking the gods for it. Luna asked with an expression of disinterest. Not that she was indifferent to her friend's torments. But she saw something like this as necessary to make Cedric mature in the future. Although being a boy with a heart of gold was a very good thing, good people die early, something she didn't want for her new friend. It was better for Cedric to suffer a little at this point and become a more mature man, rather than lose his life for someone else in a time of need. How many teams managed to hatch dragon eggs? Looking away from the despondent Cedric, Rose asked Asterion. She knew that her cunning cousin was secretly watching all the teams. Of the 12 magic schools that took part in the tournament, only Greece and Italy failed to hatch any of the 4 eggs they received. They were the first to be disqualified from the second trial. Asterion answered without hesitation, his calm voice causing even Cedric, who was nervous, to relax unconsciously. Almost as if he believed that, as long as he was there, the sky might fall and he would be holding it up. As for the number of dragons, all 10 of the remaining nations, such as France, Russia, the United States, Germany, Austria, Brazil, Japan, China, Sweden and Spain managed to hatch dragons. Asterion goes on to say what he discovered: we're not in first place in terms of the number of dragons, that place went to Brazil with 4 dragons, then France, Russia, and the United States with 3 dragons. No one was surprised by his words. If Castelobruxo, the largest magical school focused on breeding and trading magical animals, hadn't been in first place in terms of numbers, they would have suspected something was wrong. Still, I'm surprised by France, Russia, and the United States, all three of which aren't exactly known for being very good at breeding magical animals. Cedric commented with a surprised tone upon hearing the situation of the three enemy teams. Durmstrang in particular was the complete opposite of the Witch Castle. Don't say 3 dragons, even one would surprise most people. Russia has never really been a powerhouse in terms of the domestication and trade of magical animals. Did they cheat? Daphne frowned and asked with an uncertain expression, her voice tinged with suspicion for the 3 dragons on the Russian team. It wouldn't be the first time this had happened. It was quite normal for Russia to cheat in international events. Note, if you're Russian and you're reading this, bear in mind that I didn't mean to offend you with my words in this chapter. It's just the reality for most teams. Of course, it wasn't just Russia that cheated, there were always other countries cheating. Everyone wanted to have an advantage against their enemies. It was quite normal for them to try to cheat in the face of benefits and perhaps pressure from their own country. Daphne's words made everyone around her think. The news of 3 dragons on the Russian side was indeed suspicious, but it wasn't to the point where everyone began to suspect that Durmstrang was cheating. After all, it was the first international tournament of witchcraft and wizardry, and being caught cheating in something so historic wasn't exactly an image a country wanted for itself. Without proof we have nothing to do against Durmstrang, but if there is any cheating, an old fox like Dumbledore will be able to see if there is anything wrong with the Russian team. The man is known for his research into the 12 uses of dragon's blood. Asterion broke the silence, making everyone around him feel satisfied with his words. As Asterion had said, Dumbledore really wouldn't let anyone cheat on a subject that he himself was an expert in. Let's not talk about that, let's talk about the battle formation we'll be using while we're in the air. Rose commented with an extremely bright gaze. Although she could fly on her own, flying on a dragon had a completely different symbolism. Rose's words caught everyone's attention. Apparently it wasn't just Rose who was excited, Luna was equally cheerful at the moment. A stark contrast to Cedric, who was visibly more melancholy. After all, the poor boy wouldn't be riding the dream of every English boy. As for training, I think we can use Luna as bait. Asterion's words surprised everyone, including Luna herself, who showed a false expression of discontent. Seeing everyone's eyes focused on him, Asterion spoke calmly. It doesn't matter whether we use Luna or not, we will be attacked at the weakest link in the chain, namely Luna herself. So instead of waiting to be attacked, it's better to use a trap to take out 1 or 2 competitors at the start. Even though she knew Asterion's words were true, no one liked being called weak, especially not Luna, who had one of the most powerful gifts in the wizarding world. Rose frowned, but not because of Asterion's proposal, but because of something else. We don't know anything about the race, which means that even if we set up a battle formation now, everything could change when the racetrack appears. Instead of a combat formation, why don't you 3 stand together at the start of the match in a triangle position defending from all sides? Cedric, who had been silent until now, proposed in a serious voice. He continued. When the 3 of you get together, you'll be able to take on all the teams head-on without too much difficulty, especially with Asterion's Ancalagon, which is a monster that no one alone has ever dared to attack. His words won everyone's approval. With Ancalagon, even a fool would avoid attacking the biggest dragon in the competition. A relaxed atmosphere hung in the air as everyone seemed more comfortable with their decisions. So, how's married life? Luna asked, looking curiously at the trio, her expert eyes strangely brightened by the question asked. Cedric's face flushed with embarrassment at Luna's sudden question. He looked at his companion with a shocked look for asking something so intimate. If Cedric's face was ashamed, Rose's face was dark. Only those who know what she's been through know how irritating the nights in the room next to hers were. Daphne seemed to purposely moan loudly every night. It made the nights rather unpleasant for the white-haired girl. Daphne didn't look shy and answered calmly and elegantly. Better than expected, I can't wait to get married for real. An uninterested look flashed across Luna's face. She expected to see the embarrassed expression of the legendary Slytherin Ice Queen, but Daphne was very calm. Chapter 195 Dragon Race 1. Those equestrian outfits make you look incredibly beautiful, Daph. Your ass looks huge. Rose said, her eyes fixed on Daphne's buttocks, which were perfectly outlined by the tight white pants, showing off her ass in all its glory. Daphne blinked a few times when she heard this and looked at herself in the mirror. She took a few poses and confirmed that what Rose had said was the truth. With those tight-fitting clothes, what had previously been hidden by the baggy skirt of her school uniform was revealed. If you're wondering why she was dressed like that, it was just to test it out and see how it looked. The result left Daphne very satisfied. She looked beautiful. Turning to look at Rose, Daphne looked at her future wife/sister. She was dressed similarly to her, but instead of her dark green suit and white pants, Rose was wearing a dark red suit with black pants. And she had to admit, Rose was a sight for sore eyes, which made Daphne a little envious. Her beauty was slim and elegant, while Rose's beauty was larger and full of curves, especially her breasts and buttocks, which were perfectly outlined by the tight clothes. Suddenly, the door opened and Asterion entered, wearing a dark green suit, black pants and boots. As he entered, he noticed the scene inside the room and couldn't help looking at the two young women. Daphne and Rose looked beautiful in their equestrian outfits, perfectly outlining their slim, fit bodies. Although he was confused as to why Daphne was wearing those clothes, since she wasn't going to take part in the race in this second trial. You both look beautiful. Asterion wasn't stingy with his compliments and spoke in a calm tone. Whether it was Daphne or Rose, they both sensed the warm look hidden behind his apparently calm gaze. You look beautiful too, darling. Daphne approached Asterion and spoke, kissing his lips in a soft, chaste kiss. Rose nodded as she stared mostly at Asterion's ass with a glowing eye. Women like to appreciate beautiful things and squeeze them often. She was no different, and Asterion's ass was begging to be groped. If Asterion had known her thoughts, he would have rolled his eyes and retorted to her words. It was Rose's ass that was practically screaming to be groped. Perhaps noticing her gaze, Asterion grabbed Daphne's slender waist and beckoned Rose with his eyes. Although confused, Rose moved closer, and to her surprise, Asterion pulled her closer. The next second she felt the soft touch of lips and was shocked to realize that she was kissing Asterion. But she didn't think much of the moment and gave herself over to the kiss. Unlike her first impulsive kiss inside the tent before the first trial, she was much more comfortable at the moment and enjoyed the taste of his lips. Their lips crossed in a more aggressive kiss, eager for each other, both savoring the taste of each other. Seeing her fiancé kissing another woman in front of her, Daphne was at first upset, but she knew it would happen sooner or later. So she let out a helpless sigh and let everything take its course. Daphne had already accepted Rose when she had signed the agreement between the three parties. She wouldn't be stingy enough to deprive Rose of Asterion's touch because of jealousy. After a while, the kiss ended and Rose reluctantly broke away from his lips. She wanted more. kissing really was so good, especially with someone you liked. Better than the first time. Asterion commented with an amused smile playing on his lips, remembering the impulsive kiss Rose had given him. Rose rolled her eyes and glared at Asterion. She didn't want this story to be known to Daphne. She would be teased about it all her life. Although I'm curious what her first kiss was like, we're almost late for the stadium. Daphne said, looking at them both. Sighing with relief, Rose looked gratefully at Daphne. She turned her gaze to Asterion and spoke, regaining her confidence. You'll be surprised by my dragon. Asterion and Daphne looked curiously at Rose. She had already said that she was preparing a potion to purify her dragon's draconic bloodline. Honestly, if it were anyone else, even Snape, a famous potions master, Asterion would doubt that he could create such a potion. But as it was Rose, who possessed the 6 eyes and could calculate almost anything she wanted with the infinite flow of information, Asterion believed that such a potion could exist in the near future. Even so, he was surprised to notice the pride on Rose's face when talking about her dragon. Could she have made it in less than a week? Asterion thought, his lips curving into a smile. Thinking of something amusing, Asterion spoke in an encouraging tone. If you come first, I'll grant you any wish you may have. Rose's eyes lit up at his words. What does anything mean? Is that what she was thinking? Seeing the slightly perverted smile on Rose's lips, Daphne was speechless. A moment ago Rose was acting like any virgin, blushing at any kiss. Stop flirting and let's go, we're almost late. Daphne said, letting out a tired sigh. Rose proved to be someone she imagined herself to be, a chaotic force of nature. Fortunately, her innate technique, the heart of nature, could control nature, or she would be having trouble dealing with this tornado in the form of a 14-year-old girl. Asterion and Rose stopped playing and nodded. They looked at each other and smiled. We're going to win, Rose said with a confident smile. If we don't win, I'll punish you, Rose. Asterion spoke in a calm tone, but the amused look in his eyes showed that he would be enjoying himself if she lost. Snorting coldly, Rose pulled Asterion's hand and Daphne's hand, pulling them both out of the house. It didn't take long for the 3 of them to arrive at the completely packed Quadrobowl Stadium. It seemed even more crowded than when the Game of Kings took place. Remember to win, Daphne said, giving Asterion a kiss on the lips and a gentle kiss on Rose's cheek. Then she said goodbye to them both and headed towards the stands where all her friends were. Rose touched her cheek with a stunned expression and looked at the figure walking away with a blush appearing on her cheeks. Stop acting like a lovesick maiden and let's go. Seeing Rose's state, Asterion rolled his eyes and spoke with a teasing tone. He had to admit, Daphne really could make anyone fall in love with her. The woman was perfect when it came to managing relationships. Rose, hearing his words, couldn't help but feel even more embarrassed. Daphne's kiss was too unexpected for her. Taking a deep breath to calm her increasingly uncontrollable feelings, she followed Asterion to the Hogwarts tent, alongside all the other tents of the schools that were qualified to take part. Entering the tent, they both saw Luna and Cedric. Luna was wearing equestrian clothes, a blue suit and white pants. Her slender, elegant and delicate figure was enhanced even more by her clothes. Cedric, on the other hand, wasn't wearing equestrian clothes. Even at the end, he didn't manage to hatch the dragon egg, but Asterion noticed that apart from a certain despondency on his part, he showed a calmness that he hadn't had before. This made him realize that Cedric was more mature, not as naive as before. The harsh comments from his colleagues really made him see that maintaining friendly relations with everyone wasn't right. Some people simply weren't worth the time. That was fine in Asterion's eyes. Cedric's future was in the clock tower, acting as one of the 12 lords alongside him, and in the future, perhaps his foreign minister. Just as Rose was about to greet both friends, a horn sounded loudly, accompanied by a sea of deafening applause. "Looks like it started," Rose whispered to herself with an excited smile. "Good luck and win another trial." Cedric looked at his friends and spoke with a bright smile, his green eyes showing no envy, only regret at not being by their side. "We will." Luna spoke with a dreamy but equally happy tone. Chapter 196 Dragon Race 2. Leaving the Hogwarts tent, Asterion found himself surrounded by a sea of camera flashes and completely deafening applause. The whole stadium seemed to shake with the emotion of the people. A few draconic roars could be heard in the background, showing why the crowd was so excited. With his eyes gradually getting used to the spicy, blinding lights, Asterion looked at his surroundings, his eyes soon settling on the huge starting line. At the starting line, all the dragons were lying motionless, although their mouths could move. Guttural roars were escaping and some were clearly very angry at being in that position. Asterion soon noticed that the dragons' positions were completely random, no member of the Hogwarts team was anywhere near his dragon. Speaking of Ancalagon, Asterion's red eyes fixed on his dragon. Its reddish-black scales seemed to glow with the sunlight bathing them in a fiery glow. Its imposing and powerful crown of horns looked especially majestic. Unlike other dragons, Ancalagon was completely still and kept his eyes closed despite all the noise around him, a behavior that reminded Asterion of Morgan. In terms of size, Ancalagon was undoubtedly the largest dragon. His body was an incredible 15 meters long, not counting his tail. With its wings fully unfolded, its wingspan reached a terrifying 60 meters. Honestly, placed side by side with other dragons, Ancalagon looked like a calm father while his children were making a fuss all around. Asterion could hear the sighs of admiration from the audience towards his dragon, which was understandable. Ancalagon drew more attention than anything else. They said goodbye to Asterion and quickly walked towards their respective dragons. Asterion stood next to Ancalagon and stroked the scales on his long neck, treating him as if he were only a slightly larger kitten. The dragon melted at the caresses on his neck, leaning towards him as if asking for more. The sight of the dragon and Asterion caused many to exclaim in shock at the display of affection between them. After all, the difficult temperament of dragons was widespread in the wizarding world, so to see such a display surprised the witches and wizards present. Suddenly, Asterion's caresses stopped. He felt the signature of a semi-special grade witch approaching him. Looking back, he saw a rather kind-looking old man approaching him, holding a rather old but impeccably clean briefcase. His clothes were green and he wore a blue coat over everything. Asterion noticed that. The old man's eyes didn't stay still or even stare at anyone for long. From the case in his hand, Asterion felt countless signs of magical energies of different species emanating from it. If you're asking how many species there were, the current Black Patriarch would answer that there were around 10,000, and maybe a bit more. Asterion was speechless when he felt that many magical creatures. Let's not talk about the unreasonably large space in that case, just the cost of looking after so many magical creatures was simply astronomical. What is the concept of 10,000 magical creatures? The amount of money and time to manage such a large space was unbelievable in itself. Piecing together all the clues before him, Asterion already knew who the old man was. The world's most famous magizoologist, Newt Scamander. For Dumbledore, one of his most important lieutenants in the fight against Grindelwald in the past. Mr. Black. The old man greeted Asterion, but at no point did his eyes meet Asterion's eyes. The old man's eyes were fixed on the dragon and no one else. He seemed fascinated by the dragon. Mr. Scamander. Asterion didn't mind the man's particularly rude behavior. He knew that the old man in front of him loved magical creatures above all else, and a variant of a new species like Ancalagon was especially tempting for him. Reluctantly averting his eyes from the beautiful, majestic creature, Newt turned his gaze to Asterion, but didn't look him in the eye. "It's a Hedridian black, how did it mutate?" he asked, his voice filled with an innocent curiosity, almost childish if you calculated that the man was 99 years old this year. "Mixed with the blood of a cursed spirit," Asterion replied without caring much. Of course, he wouldn't say that the cursed spirit was Morgan. Imagine the impact of Morgan's existence being revealed to the world. It would certainly cause too many problems for him. Newt blinked a few times as if he doubted whether he had heard Asterion's words correctly. And seeing the calm look on his face, Newt wanted to refute the absurd claims made. As someone who had studied magical creatures all his life, he knew very well what happened when individuals of different species mated. Most of the time, the offspring born died or lived very little due to genetic defects. A hybrid between a cursed spirit and a magical creature has never been reported in any book in wizarding civilization. So Asterion's words without any proof didn't exactly satisfy the old magizoologist. Seeing the suspicious look in the old man's eyes, Asterion rolled his eyes. He knew very well that his casual excuse couldn't convince the old man in front of him. However, Asterion had never planned to say anything to Newt Scamander in the first place and hadn't even bothered to invent a more believable excuse for the old man. Unfortunately, Asterion didn't know that Newt Scamander could be especially intrusive and very curious when it came to magical creatures. Just as he was about to say something, Asterion noticed Newt's briefcase shuddering for a moment and opening slightly. Suddenly, a tentacle emerged from the case, but was pushed back by Newt. Asterion's lips twitched unnaturally and he wondered if that case had more stringent protection. He could imagine the pandemonium that would ensue if all the magical creatures in the case escaped. It could be said that it would be an event worthy of being described in the annals of the history of the wizarding world. Perhaps noticing Asterion's increasingly strange gaze, Newt looked away and looked all around, but not at Patriarch Black, feeling inexplicably guilty. Newt quickly grabbed his briefcase and disappeared, heading towards the stands, exactly towards the VIP seats where Dumbledore and all the others were. Asterion no longer cared about the exotic Newt Scamander and concentrated on checking that the cell at the base of the dragon's neck was firmly attached. Even if he wasn't afraid of falling from a high altitude, he didn't want to be embarrassed in the eyes of hundreds of thousands of wizards and witches from all over the planet. In the VIP seats, seeing Newt's arrival, Dumbledore stood up and hugged his old friend with a smile on his face. "You look younger since we last met," Dumbledore said with a cheerful tone. "And you look older, Professor," Newt replied with an equally comfortable smile. "That happens to all humans and I'm no different," Dumbledore replied with a nonchalant tone. It seemed that death drawing ever closer didn't seem to bother the wizard. "I'm glad you agreed to come to the tournament." Taking a seat in the main chair, Dumbledore replied with relief in his voice. This made Newt frown. He knew the look on the Hogwarts principal's face, the same look he had seen when he took part in the war against Grindelwald. What happened? Snapping his fingers, Newt created a barrier that prevented the sound from propagating and asked, pushing aside any other distracting thoughts in his head. I want you to investigate something for me, Newt. You're the only one I can trust. Reinforcing the barrier so that the sound wouldn't propagate, Dumbledore spoke with an incredibly serious tone. He continued speaking. Investigate an organization called R. It's behind the recent conspiracies involving something very dangerous. Dangerous enough to destroy the whole of Great Britain. Hearing his words, Newt's face showed a look of shock despite his years of experience. Although he had assumed that something very serious had happened for Dumbledore to invite him out of his retirement that he was enjoying with his wife, he wasn't expecting something on that scale. This organization called R is so dangerous. It seems even more dangerous than Grindelwald's acolytes. Newt asked, still somewhat skeptical about this R organization. Quite understandably, given that before this, he had never even heard of such an organization. Knowing his doubts, Dumbledore wasn't stingy and told him everything he knew so far. From what I've been able to gather so far, it's an organization created before Hogwarts was even built. An order of witches and wizards used it to survive in the past era, but it has endured to this day, becoming a secret organization that tries to control the world from the shadows. The more he listened, the more Newt's eyes widened in shock at so many revelations. He couldn't believe that such a powerful organization could exist and remain hidden for over 1,000 years. It won't be easy, Professor. From what you've told me, this organization has infiltrated all the ministries of magic in various countries. Investigating something like this with so many eyes watching won't be an easy task. Newt commented with a terribly serious expression. His voice had lost all the hesitation and lightness it had had before. Newt could imagine that he was walking into a hive of bees and it only took one sighting for everyone to run to him with the intention of killing him. Chapter 197 Dragon Race 3. Seeing Newt's silence, Dumbledore let out a tired sigh, but remained silent for a moment. The Hogwarts principal knew that this would be an extremely life-threatening mission, to say the least. Newt could even end up facing a special grade wizard during the mission. And the chances of this fight ending badly for Newt were high. Unfortunately, Dumbledore couldn't personally investigate or even send anyone on this mission. Investigating such an ancient and secret organization was too dangerous for any weak wizard. Newt was perfect for the mission. Dumbledore could trust him, and above all, Newt had the power to protect himself should anything go wrong during the mission. Don't worry, Professor. Although my bones are a little rusty, they still work as strong as dragon muscles. Perhaps noticing the worried look on the Hogwarts headmaster's face, Newt commented with a light and unconcerned tone. For a brief moment, Dumbledore seemed to see the same eccentric boy in his 5th year at Hogwarts towering over the old man in front of him. I'm just worried about you, Newt. If you feel something is wrong, don't hesitate to run away. Dumbledore spoke with a terribly serious tone, leaving no room for any words of refusal on Newt's part. The world's most famous magizoologist looked embarrassed, but nodded hesitantly, agreeing with Dumbledore's words. Showing a satisfied expression on his face, Dumbledore got up and stood in front of the audience, which had calmed down completely at his arrival. Scanning the people in the stands, he could see the anticipation and excitement for the tournament on the faces of these wizards and witches. Dumbledore began his words with a joke. I think we're all excited about what's going to happen. And just between you and me, I am too. I always dreamed as a child of seeing a dragon race. Laughter rang out in the stands as some shouted that they had similar dreams as children. Who hasn't dreamt of riding on a dragon and saving the princess? Clearing his throat, Dumbledore continued. The race will be divided into 3 main areas: land, water and area. The dragons and their riders will have to pass through natural and artificial obstacles to reach the finish. Dumbledore's words caught everyone's attention, especially the competitors. A land and air race was normal, after all, dragons could run and fly, but a water race? Dragon and water could never be mixed in the same sentence without causing strangeness in many people's minds. How in Merlin's name could a dragon swim underwater? That was the thought of almost everyone, including Asterion. He couldn't understand how Dumbledore could think of creating such a strange race in the first place. As if reading the doubts of talented young wizards and witches from various countries, Dumbledore replied in an amused tone. Life is an experience full of surprises, be they good or bad. As to what the surprise prepared for them was, Dumbledore didn't say and gave no hint as to what it might be. The participants were speechless, knowing that the race couldn't be as simple as it seemed. Is it hard to ask for just a normal race? Asterion heard a young Asian-looking woman next to him mutter to herself. Her English was very good, there was hardly an accent in her voice. The young woman's dragon was a Chinese fireball, which was lying next to her in a very lazy manner. Asterion didn't blame the young woman. The Game of Kings was a rather stressful competition for countries other than Hogwarts. The Chinese team in particular collapsed with its male members being enslaved by Fleur. Perhaps noticing a look about her, Ling Zhang turned and found a pair of red eyes staring at her with a hint of curiosity. She knew who it was, there was no way not to know who the young man in front of him was. One of the world's 33 special grade wizards and the youngest of them all. The slayer of 2 other special grade wizards, Asterion Black, the Black Prince. In all honesty, Ling Zhang felt that she could brag for a lifetime about taking on a special grade and coming out of the attack practically unscathed. How many people had the luxury of facing a special grade warlock and coming out alive? As far as she knew, not many. Lord Black. She spoke, greeting the special grade warlock politely. Good race. Asterion nodded and replied back, then went back to focusing on Ancalagon. Ling Zhang was speechless. She had hoped to have a little chat, but seeing his obvious detachment, she shook the gourd helplessly and focused on the dragon itself. Without caring if anyone was watching or not, she took a vial out of her bag and opened the stopper that covered the glass vial. Bringing the flask close to the dragon's nose, Ling Zhang made the dragon smell the smoke escaping from the flask, and as if by magic, the whole dragon seemed excited again, its frenzied eyes staring at its surroundings with a bestial gleam. Calm down, girl. Suddenly, that bestial, cruel look calmed down when it heard Ling Zhang's voice, and it lay down on the ground with its reptilian eyes staring at Ling Zhang. This made Asterion next to her turn his head and look at the bottle in the young woman's hand with an interesting look. Asterion knew that the contents of the bottle were just some kind of extremely potent anesthetic in the form of smoke, probably created by the Chinese over the centuries, but the main reason the dragon accepted the Chinese girl's command was her voice. Something that Asterion assumed was her innate technique, and she used her voice to hypnotize the Chinese fireball. Of course, the young woman definitely wasn't strong enough to control the dragon with her own strength, so the dragon was completely drugged to the point where it couldn't move on its own. Something like that would greatly affect the efficiency of the dragon's flight, but compared to not being able to ride the dragon, that was a price many competitors didn't mind paying easily. I must be careful. Asterion thought. An innate technique like that could hypnotize the enemy was problematic, especially for beings who had no defenses for this kind of attack. He didn't need to worry about that. Baskerville was in his shadow and he was completely safe. But Ancalagon was an unknown. Asterion didn't know if Ancalagon had inherited some of her power from Morgan, which he found difficult to do. All competitors must get on their respective dragons. Hearing Dumbledore's voice, Asterion put those thoughts aside for the moment and climbed up Ancalagon's neck to the saddle located at the base of the dragon's slender, long neck. Attaching the kill hooks to his saddle belt, which would prevent him from falling from a high altitude, Asterion settled into the dragon's saddle and couldn't help but notice that his angle of vision was very high at this point. The warm touch and smell that reminded him of sulfur made his nose twitch gently. Strangely, he liked the pungent smell. Stroking the reddish-black scales at the ends, Asterion muttered to himself. Let's have some fun together, big boy. Ancalagon opened his eyes and let out a guttural roar as his huge body rose from the ground, towering far above the other dragons. Dumbledore looked at the huge, particularly eye-catching Ancalagon and couldn't help but twitch his lips unnaturally. The dragon was definitely a very clear variation of a Hedradian black. How Asterion had managed to do this in less than a week. Even he had no idea. He knew dragons very well, and if it were so easy to create a variation of a race, there would be many more dragons than the world currently had. Dragon DNA is extremely xenophobic and proud, preferring to decay by mixing with other DNA, so Asterion being able to create a variation of the Hedradian black was a real doubt in Dumbledore's mind. Letting out a weary sigh, Dumbledore took a deep breath and shouted through the magical microphone. Get ready! Chapter 198 Dragon Race 4. At Dumbledore's words, all the teams that were still in the running climbed onto their respective dragons without any hesitation. The entire audience held its breath watching dozens of dragons of different colors, shapes, and sizes lined up side by side. There were some clever people in the audience who started placing bets on who would reach the final line first. And unexpectedly, many people started betting without hesitation. Obviously, the excited atmosphere filled with joy numbed the brains of countless wizards and witches. They didn't even mind betting some money in exchange for the pleasure of winning something. Dumbledore started the countdown while pointing his wand towards the sky. 1, 2, 3, 4. Everyone leaned forward slightly in the saddle, waiting for the sound of the starting line. All the dragons, no matter how drugged or even enslaved, seemed particularly fierce and excited to be victorious. 5. The moment Dumbledore spoke, he flicked his wrist and white light emerged from the tip of his wand. A high-pitched, arrogant cry rang out in the sky and a white phoenix tore through the heavens with its imposing height and grace worthy of being the king of birds. Well. In the next moment, all the dragons shot forward, all using their wings as forearms while their short but powerful legs propelled their huge bodies forward. As soon as they crossed the line, a green flame enveloped everyone, including the dragons, who disappeared from the Quidditch stadium, leaving the audience still in shock at the surprising events. It wasn't without reason that everyone was shocked, the green flames indicating a large-scale Fleur network, big enough to transport entire armies. The ministers of magic from various countries straightened up in their chairs at the sight of something so unbelievable. Seeing everyone looking at him with a warm gaze, as if he were seeing a beautiful woman in front of him, Dumbledore stroked his beard and couldn't help thinking that accepting the creation of the clock tower had its enormous benefits. Especially when it came to magical heritage. The noble houses had monopolized ancient knowledge and spells that had previously been extinct for hundreds or thousands of years. An accumulation of knowledge over such a long period was precious to any magical country and civilization. So, in less than 2 years of creation, with no longer a monopoly on knowledge, the clock tower benefited the whole of England as a whole. It seemed that the whole country was full of vitality, with countless innovative ideas and people with a desire to explore magic even further. The Fleur network, which could now be used on a large scale at once, was one of the recent inventions, although the side effects were still a little severe, as it caused an extremely strong feeling of nausea, even stronger than operating. Dumbledore took advantage of the fact that the international tournament was taking place and exposed the new transportation wizardry to the wizarding world. The reason for this? As well as expressing England's strength in the eyes of hundreds of thousands of wizards and witches, Dumbledore wanted to steal. Attract talent from other countries. And seeing the expression of the many wizards in the audience, a smile appeared on Dumbledore's lips. Asterion felt his body being forced backwards as Ancalagon advanced. He quickly grabbed the saddle rests and looked at his surroundings with a touch of surprise in his eyes. His body seemed infinitely thinner and squeezed through a long tube in all directions. The meal inside his body threatened to regurgitate at any moment. Suddenly, Asterion felt his body land on solid ground again, or rather, he felt Ancalagon's body land on solid ground. Patriarch Black couldn't help but glance at his surroundings and assume that he no longer seemed to be at Hogwarts. More precisely, he assumed that he was no longer in England. An endless sea of sand unfolded in front of Asterion. Suddenly, a parchment appeared above Asterion and fell gently into his hands. His eyes fell on the bold title. The Way to the Golden Land. Description: the desert before you is untamed, but behind the dangers, there is a golden road that leads to immeasurable riches. Find the golden land and go on to the next level. Rules: killing is not allowed under any circumstances. If this rule is broken, the entire team will be eliminated directly from the International Tournament of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Participants can use any means to find the golden path and venture into the desert. Participants must refrain from using any large-scale spells that cause damage to the environment. The first to reach the golden path will win a bonus for the next phase. There were other rules such as not flying too high so as not to alert the surrounding Muggle governments, but Asterion didn't care. He put the parchment away and looked around. Everywhere he looked, there was sand and more sand, as if there was no end to the golden color of the sand. Apart from a few animals without magic, there was absolutely no one around, which left Asterion with a sincere headache. He wanted to join Rose and Luna to start looking for the golden path, but it looked like it wouldn't be so easy to find his teammates. Rose would be a godsend for Asterion right now. Her eyes were perfect for finding something in this endless desert of sand and death. Unfortunately, his other fiancée wasn't around. Shaking his head, Asterion held out his hand and a cursed spirit in the shape of an eye floated above his hand. Go and watch the surroundings, he muttered to himself. With his words, the cursed spirit split into countless smaller versions of itself and they all spread out around 10 kilometers. Tens of thousands of fields of vision from different angles and places appeared in Asterion's mind at that moment. It was as if he had tens of thousands of eyes at the same time, and these eyes had a life of their own, which certainly caused some discomfort to Patriarch Black's sensory senses. Suddenly, abruptly, Asterion turned his head and looked directly at a small colorful bird on top of a cactus. The bird was obviously not a desert dweller with those vivid, elegant colors. A nagging feeling of being spied on was coming from the little bird. Asterion knew that just like in the Game of Kings, he was being watched by hundreds of thousands of wizards and witches in the Quidditch Stadium right now. Ignoring the eavesdropping bird, Asterion gently stroked the scales on Ancalagon's neck, and the dragon didn't need to hear what his master wanted at the moment. He let out a calm guttural roar and began to run, then unfolded his wings and lifted his huge body 15 meters off the ground. It was incredible for a creature of this size to be able to rise into the air like any normal bird. Even so, the dragon's ability to fly was not only physical, but also magical, just like dragon breath. Both involved physical and magical aspects to work properly. Looking down, Asterion couldn't help but think that the desert was very beautiful when you could ignore the infernal heat in this place. Dunes and mountains of sand seemed endless around him. There simply seemed to be no end. Chapter 199 Dragon Race 5. The dry, hot air and the sand slapping against his face weren't exactly the most pleasant feelings in the world. Asterion had been flying dozens of meters above the ground for some time, but there wasn't a single living soul in the desert. The infernal heat distorted the field of vision and created some mirages on the horizon, but they were just that, mirages. It made Asterion wonder if he was in the world's largest hot desert, the Sahara Desert, with 9.2 million square kilometers. Honestly, if this was the Sahara, finding the golden path wouldn't be easy at all. It was no different than looking for a golden beetle in this golden expanse of sand. Suddenly, Asterion looked in a certain direction and narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. Through the cursed spirit he had summoned earlier, he glimpsed a verdant oasis in this golden hell. Without needing Asterion's command, Ancalagon let out a low trill and changed direction in the air with surprising agility despite the enormous size and weight of the magical beast. Asterion stroked the dragon's scales and couldn't help but notice that Ancalagon was adorably helpful at times when he didn't need to be, trying to help him with the smallest of details. Flying for some time, the 15-meter-long dragon with huge unfolded wings dived towards the ground. As it was relatively close to the ground, about 10 meters high, wherever the dragon flew above, golden sand was thrown everywhere, scattering all around. Asterion soon spotted the oasis, a paradise in the midst of the hot hell that surrounds the environment with ferocity. Even the air seemed more humid near the country, which was normal given the moisture in the air. Ancalagon landed on the verdant ground with a thud and lowered his strong chest. He rested his head on the ground while cautiously looking around for any danger. Asterion unfastened the chain belt from his saddle and jumped off the dragon with a small leap and landed on the ground. He couldn't help but take a deep breath at the smell of the trees and water in the air, a trivial thing he never thought he'd miss, but here he was, feeling relaxed at being surrounded by the green color of nature. The dragon got up after Asterion's descent and walked slowly with heavy steps towards the lake, where he basked in the fresh, sweet water of the oasis. Asterion smiled gently when he saw the dragon taking a drink and joined him to cool off. He also took the opportunity and brushed off the sand stuck to his body. Having sand on certain parts of his body was a real nuisance. Suddenly, Asterion's movement stopped. He turned his head and looked towards the south. Even without the cursed spirits, he could still feel two different magical energies rapidly approaching his location. Making a cursed spirit focus in a southerly direction, Asterion was speechless when he saw the beautiful dragon flying through the air and riding on top of it, a beautiful young woman with golden hair and blue eyes. Without his intervention, Asterion watched the beautiful dragon land in the oasis with a heavy thud and a young girl jump off the dragon and land on the ground without much difficulty. The dragon was simply beautiful, a work of art made by nature. Its pearly scales seemed to reflect the sun's rays, making the scales practically glow. The dragon's eyes were even more special, they were multicolored even though there were no pupils. It was an Antipodean opali, considered the most beautiful dragon in the world and the least aggressive of all the dragon breeds. "I didn't expect to meet you first, Lord Black." Removing her gloves with the help of her teeth, Fleur greeted her rival with a graceful smile on her lips. Her eyes danced over Asterion's abdomen for a moment before focusing on his face as if nothing had happened. "I must say it's a surprise too, Lady Delacour." Asterion greeted the woman with no intention of attacking, which was true, he had no intention of attacking Fleur. At least, not at the moment. "I hope my sister isn't being too much trouble." Fleur approached Asterion and commented with obvious amusement in her eyes. It was more than obvious that she knew Gabrielle's intentions. Asterion rolled his eyes, picked up his dark green suit and got dressed again, much to the disappointment of Fleur and the audience watching everything on the big screens in the Quidditch stadium. "She's lovely, although a little too invasive." Fleur let out a graceful laugh and replied in an amused tone. "We're quite insistent when we want something. Believe me, I've noticed and so has my fiancé." Asterion commented harshly, he wasn't blind to the girl's advances, but apart from appreciating Gabrielle's talent for being a great foreign minister, he didn't really have any feelings for the lovely French girl. Fleur shrugged, knowing about her sister's seduction of an engaged man, then her face showed a serious expression. "I assume you've read the scroll." Asterion nodded at her words, agreeing. "It's impossible to find the golden path by blindly searching, the tournament must have placed clues in certain special places in the desert like the oases." Fleur spoke with a calm, cold expression. That's what she thought after seeing the size of the desert and guessing which one it was. "Yes, that's what I thought too, but how many oases are there in such a large desert?" Asterion sighed a little wearily, he could imagine that even with the artificial oases made by the Muggles, the amount was definitely not great. Even if the scope of the search had narrowed because of the oases, how could it be possible to find oases in a desert that was bigger than many countries put together? All that remains is to wait and investigate this oasis. Fleur said, looking around, her eyes stopping for a moment on the huge dragon next to her, black scales with reddish tones at the edges. It looked like a monster capable of terrifying anyone with its appearance alone. Its huge body made her dragon's body look like a child next to an adult. Fleur had no idea that her dragon would be killed in seconds in an arena fight. Her beautiful dragon looked like a docile sheep compared to the black and red monster. At the same time, she saw that her dragon seemed attracted to Asterion's dragon and that made her roll her eyes. She hadn't expected her dragon to like big guys. "Your dragon seduced mine," Fleur said with an exaggerated tone of indignation as if it was Asterion's fault in the first place. Asterion rolled his eyes, but looked at Ancalagon with satisfaction, like a father seeing his son dating for the first time. Asterion and Fleur stopped talking and went to investigate the separate oases, both looking for any sign of a clue left by the tournament. Unfortunately, even after a few hours of searching, nothing was found. Looking at the sun setting on the horizon and the scorching heat diminishing by the minute, Asterion knew that this search would have to stop for a moment. Let's stop, it's pointless looking for any clues at night. Fleur beside him nodded and wiped the sweat running down her face, an exhausted look appearing on her beautiful face. I want a shower, I've got sand in certain areas that I never thought I'd have. She spoke in a harsh tone full of annoyance, feeling dirty all over. Asterion nodded in agreement with her words, a bath really would be a boon right now. I'll put a barrier across the lake so that you and I can bathe in privacy. Fleur commented, taking out her wand and turning her wrist. The next moment, darkness descended from the sky and covered the entire lake. However, if you looked closely at the barrier, you could see that it was crooked and in many places looked uneven. It didn't even look like a conventional barrier, which was usually oval. Seeing the barrier, Asterion raised an eyebrow and couldn't help noticing how bad Fleur's skills were. Perhaps noticing Asterion's strange looks, Fleur smiled and spoke in a simple tone, I'm terrible at barriers, but that's normal, nobody's perfect. Being human means being naturally flawed. Patriarch Black nodded in agreement with Fleur's words, he himself could dissect a body so cleanly and without errors that it would frighten even the most experienced of doctors. At the same time, he was terrible at potions, no matter how hard he tried, potion recipes seemed like ancient gospel from the olden days. Chapter 200 Dragon Race 6 Asterion finished bathing and stepped out of the barrier, which he could break with one punch, even if he was limited to using the strength of a grade 2. On his way out, he noticed Fleur warming herself around a fire she had made. Looking up, Asterion couldn't help but be stunned. Before his eyes, a sea of stars shone brightly against a dark background. Tiny twinkling sparkles that seemed to give magic to the lifeless world. In London, or even at Hogwarts, which was located in Scotland, there wasn't such a clear view of the starry sky as he was seeing at this moment. Beautiful, isn't it? Fleur commented, biting into her beef jerky as she looked at Asterion with a smile. She could see his shock at looking at the stars, something she was also stunned to see. Yes, stunning. Asterion replied sincerely, taking a seat on the other side of the fire facing Fleur. Before Fleur could agree to anything, she smelled something delicious in the air and looked over at Asterion, where she found the special grade wizard with a plate of still steaming food and a glass of wine. The sight of the sumptuous, hot meal in the middle of the cold desert at night made Fleur's beautiful face twitch for a moment. She looked at the dried, salted meat in her hand and completely lost her appetite. The once decent taste seemed to turn into candle wax, an insipid taste. Aren't you going to invite a lady to eat, Lord Black? Fleur asked in a sweet, gentle tone as she tucked a lock of golden hair behind her ear, a shy smile playing on her red lipstick-stained lips. Asterion raised an eyebrow and brought the goblet to his lips, where he tasted the purplish liquid. He seemed to ponder before replying with an amused smile on his lips, and if there's poison in the food and drink. Then I'll leave my body in your care, Lord Black, Fleur replied flirtatiously as she approached Asterion. She sat down next to him with her shoulder gently rubbing his. Asterion, feeling the touch on his shoulder, looked at Fleur with dissatisfaction and moved slightly away, creating a distance of 10 centimeters between them. Fleur's face contorted again, there was a stiff, tense smile on her lips. It was the first time she had been treated with such repulsion by a person, especially by a man 6 years younger than her. Although she knew from Gabrielle that Asterion didn't like the touch of strangers, she didn't think she was included in that select list of people. I must say, this is the first time a man has ever walked away from me." Taking a deep breath, calming down her feelings bubbling in her chest, Fleur commented with a tone that was a little awkward with what was happening. Asterion didn't answer and ate in silence, his red eyes fixed on Ancalagon. The dragon was perfectly camouflaged against the dark night. If it hadn't been for the red reflections of his scales when the flickering flame of the campfire bathed his figure, it would have been difficult to find the dragon normally in the dark night. Next to him, the pearly dragon slept peacefully as if using his body to warm himself in the extremely cold desert night. Suddenly, while looking at both dragons, Asterion noticed something strange. Between the leaves of the trees, the pale glow of the moon, which looked like tentacles reaching into the dark night, gradually created an image. Although the image was a little distorted and frosted, Asterion, as a lover of the stars as she had always been, even in her past life, could still recognize the image. It was the constellation Ursa Minor. Asterion was absolutely certain that it was no coincidence that the Ursa Minor constellation had appeared at that moment. That's because Ursa Minor was home to a very special star for humanity. The North Star. A star that guided humanity before the invention of compasses. For thousands of years, it was the star that enabled long-distance travel, allowing humanity to begin the age of exploration, discovering new continents and places all over the planet. All because of a star, the North Star. Fleur, who was paying attention to Asterion, followed his gaze and couldn't help but narrow her eyes thoughtfully. Although astronomy wasn't her favorite subject at Beauxbatons, she still understood the basics. And recognizing constellations was one of the first lessons a new pupil had upon entering the school. Asterion and Fleur came to the same conclusion in an instant. The north. The golden path was in the north. This was extremely valuable information, and they both looked at each other and saw the smile on each other's lips. If Asterion had no reason to fight Fleur, now he did. Knowing this, Fleur, while maintaining her gentle and gracious smile, looked at her dragon sleeping next to Ancalagon and couldn't help but curse how simplistic her dragon was. She couldn't stand to see a handsome man appear and run to him. Even if by some miracle she could escape from Asterion, she couldn't waste time fighting Asterion's dragon. And that delay could lead to Asterion getting to her, and it wouldn't just be the dragon she had to worry about, but also a special grade wizard. After the fight with Rose and almost dying in the process, Fleur didn't think she could beat Asterion, who had already killed 2 other special grade wizards before. The grade 2 limitation was merely a limitation on the amount of magical energy and how quickly it regenerates. In the end, even with the strength of a grade 2, Asterion and Rose were unquestionably special grade wizards, and how they controlled and shaped their magical energies was not possible for any other wizard or witch below the special grade. So fighting Asterion was completely out of the question at the moment. She didn't want to be defeated so soon, without even finishing the first terrestrial phase of the race. The International Tournament of Witchcraft and Wizardry was too important for her future plans and her own career. She could lose to Hogwarts, but she had to be on the podium when the tournament was over. "I have a proposition." Maintaining a sweet, gracious smile, Fleur spoke, causing Asterion to lower the arm he was about to raise a second ago. Seeing Asterion stop, Fleur regained confidence in getting out of this desperate situation. As long as Patriarch Black could listen and hesitate to attack her, it meant there was room for negotiation. Fleur didn't fear the price she would have to pay, she feared that she wouldn't be able to negotiate in the first place. Asterion looked at Fleur with interest and waited for her words. He knew the young woman was intelligent enough not to play games with him. Taking a deep breath, Fleur spoke. I can help you and your team with anything unforeseen. Before she could finish, she saw Asterion raise his arm towards her again. This made the young woman's heart flutter again, and she sped up what she was saying even more, without any ado, and got straight to the point. I will serve as your shield at the second trial. As she said this, Fleur saw Asterion lower his arm, but there was no smile in his eyes. Gritting her teeth as a feeling of helplessness welled up in her chest, Fleur, despite what she was feeling, spoke calmly. Before I start, others can't hear what I'm about to say. Although what she was about to reveal would be considered treason, as her father had once told her as a child, never miss a good opportunity to profit. Asterion understood what she wanted to say and snapped his fingers, a barrier covering them both in a mere instant. Fleur, seeing the perfectly oval and instantaneous barrier, knew immediately the differences in abilities between the two. Seeing Asterion still waiting for her words, Fleur began to speak without hiding anything about France's state secrets. Germany. The more he listened to Fleur's words, the colder Asterion's eyes became. He really didn't think Germany had the courage to stand up for the fourth time. He had to admit, the nation had courage above all else. Why did you tell me that? Asterion asked with a cold, indifferent tone, the goodwill he had for Fleur disappearing as if it had never existed in the first place. Although we hate the English, we hate even more the one who crushed our glory and prestige, tore high morals and washed the streets of Paris with blood. My father may think it's a good idea to ally with our former enemies, but I'm a true conservative. Fleur spoke with an equally cold tone. Even if she lost Asterion's goodwill, what she could gain was much more. Besides, goodwill can be earned again. Chapter 201 Dragon Race 7. Asterion climbed onto Ancalagon and didn't wait for the sun to rise before heading north. As for Fleur, the half-breed Vila was much more restrained around him, almost as if she was afraid of annoying him, something he could understand. At the same time, Asterion couldn't help remembering Fleur's words about France and Germany. In Fleur's words, both of his parents' ministers of magic were quite united during the tournament. So much so that it wasn't unusual for the German minister of magic, Joseph Weiss, to spend the night in the French tent. As for what they were doing inside, Asterion had two options, sex and conspiracies. And knowing what little he knew of Joseph Weiss, he knew that the man was using the reputation of the open marriage between Louis and Apollon Delacour to cover up his schemes and conspiracies. Honestly, Germany wanting to start a war after the attacks it suffered from Grindelwald was normal, but the nation didn't just want a war, it wanted to force the whole world against Grindelwald. And the plan was audacious, to say the least. Grindelwald is a seer, and because of Luna, Asterion knew how broken this ability was. Locating and attacking the Dark Lord was an extremely difficult task. How do you locate someone who can see the future? Still, Joseph Weiss having the courage to plot against the Dark Lord was commendable, albeit extremely stupid, but commendable nonetheless. Asterion really wanted to know Joseph's reaction to the fact that he and his family weren't dead because Grindelwald was focused on finishing his insane, decades-long plan. Had Grindelwald not been occupied with more important matters at the moment, Asterion had no doubt that Joseph and his entire family would have been killed by the Dark Lord and his fanatical acolytes. Don't underestimate the paranoia and determination of a man who sees the future. Putting on the belt that connected the cell by metal chains, Asterion settled into the cell as comfortably as possible and waited. Ancalagon rose from the ground with a loud trill and shook the dust off his body, his huge 15-meter body trembling gently. He took one last look at the Fleur pearl dragon and began to pick up speed. It unfolded its wings and rose into the sky in an instant, its roar echoing in the dark night. Seeing her dragon looking longingly at Ancalagon, Fleur pursed her lips again, the scene looking like a husband going to work far away and not seeing his wife for a long time. "Stop being so simple, you can't run after men, men should run after you," Fleur commented with displeasure to her dragon, who seemed to completely ignore her words as if they were nothing and continued to stare at the dragon's figure already obscured by the night. Letting out a tired sigh, Fleur looked at the plate of food and the glass of wine left for her by Asterion. He at least had the decency to leave a meal for a lonely lady like me. Fleur muttered to herself. She didn't seem at all rushed to reach the golden path before Asterion. It wasn't that she wasn't in a hurry, but she knew that at this moment, the North would be extremely agitated. A real dragon war was going on, she could imagine how chaotic the situation was. It was extremely dangerous, especially because of her dragon. Although the Antipodean Opali was the most docile of all dragons, they were ultimately quite weak compared to other dragon breeds. Getting involved in a head-on war with a not-so-strong dragon was totally stupid in her opinion. She could wait an hour and head north. Sipping the wine Asterion had left for her, Fleur commented, feeling the slightly bitter taste on her tongue. "Worthy of being an English wine, classless barbarians." Asterion, riding Ancalagon, was flying at top speed towards the north, the strong winds of the cold night carrying a great deal of sand. The sound of the dragon's wings flapping loudly was the only thing other than the wind he could hear. Suddenly, Asterion's eyes fixed on a specific direction, a bolt of blue energy tore through the air and disappeared before another bolt of red energy was thrown back in the direction of the bolt of blue energy. Spells. Asterion knew that a fight was currently taking place in the area, and he didn't hesitate to head towards the battlefield. Ancalagon, as if predicting that he would finally be fighting, let out a great roar and turned his body towards the fight that was taking place at that moment. Asterion smiled when he saw his winged partner's excitement. Perhaps this warlike characteristic was the only thing that set Ancalagon apart from Morgan. As a dragon, he was as warlike as any of his kind, and even more so because of the cursed spirit genes in his DNA. The closer he got, the more Asterion could see of the battlefield, dragons tearing the air with their bodies while spells made the fight look like a space battlefield out of Star Wars. There were 4 dragons, a Chinese fireball, Romanian longhorn, Catalonian fireball and Hungarian horntail. The dragons were around 7 to 9 meters long, their wings larger than their bodies, reaching a wingspan of tens of meters. Even in the dark night, Asterion could see the battlefield perfectly. He recognized the 4 dragon riders from different teams. 3 women and 1 man. From the Russian team, Anastasia Romanova, her dragon was the Ukrainian Ironbelly. From the American team, David Williams, his dragon was a Romanian longhorn. From the Japanese team, Aiko Nakamura, her dragon was a Catalonian fireball. From the Chinese team, Ling Zhang, his dragon was a Chinese fireball. The 4 dragon riders fought each other tooth and nail, casting spells every second they could. Expelliarmus was the most common, and although it was a harmless spell, it was especially deadly given the height all the competitors were currently at. As it was night, all 4 knights were at a much higher altitude than allowed, which made the situation extremely risky, as even a fall from a height of kilometers was enough to kill any witch or witch below special grade. However, none of the party seemed to care and were casting spells as if it were nothing. It was truly attacks with intent to kill. This confused Asterion a little. He really couldn't imagine what drove 4 people to kill each other like this despite the tournament's strict rules against such acts of murder. After all, countries couldn't allow their best talents to die in a competition. It was extremely stupid to let such a thing happen. But what left Asterion even more speechless was that when the knightly cadres saw him coming, they turned the 1v1 war into 4v1 in a mere instant. Asterion found himself surrounded by 4 dragons and their respective riders, including the young Chinese woman he had spoken of at the beginning, on the starting line, who had the innate technique related to voice. Drawing his wand, Asterion didn't show much reaction to being surrounded. He had already done too many important things to be nervous in front of mere wizards and witches below grade 2. Chapter 202 Dragon Race 8, Expelliarmus, Expelliarmus. Asterion heard a Chinese voice speak in English and a blue flash flew towards him extremely quickly. Note: according to the GPT chat, this is how a Chinese Asian speaks in English with a Chinese accent. If, for some reason or miracle, I have a Chinese reader, talk to me and I'll correct it right away. Rebounding an Expelliarmus back at the Chinese witch, Asterion felt Ancalagon spin in the air, gracefully turning around and colliding head-on with the Chinese fireball. The incessant shaking from the collision of both magical creatures didn't make his figure sway. The patriarch of House Black was standing firmly in his cell in place without moving. The red and gold dragon collided with the black dragon with reddish scales biting and clawing at each other in the air as they fought in the purest form of violence invented. Body against body. Ancalagon opened his mouth and bit into the Chinese fireball's neck, driving his teeth into the magical creature's scales and tearing a large chunk out of the beautiful red and gold dragon's neck. The Chinese fireball didn't let the attack go by itself. It opened its mouth and unleashed a dragon's deadliest weapon. The breath of fire in the shape of a fireball heated up the surroundings and flew towards Ancalagon. The black dragon showed no fear and unleashed its own flames, jets of powerful and extremely destructive black flames. Both flaming blasts collided in the air, scattering flames across the sky, but the victor proved victorious within a few seconds of collision. The black flames consumed the orange flames of the red dragon and engulfed the dragon and its rider without any mercy. An animalistic cry sounded from the red dragon now burning in flames in the air. As black sparks flew around him, Asterion watched the burning dragon and its rider with a calm gaze. Suddenly, a large amount of water gathered and fell on top of the still burning dragon, extinguishing the fire almost immediately, revealing the figure of the dragon and his rider. Asterion knew that if Ancalagon were an adult, it wouldn't be so easy to put out his flames. Unfortunately, his little 15-meter dragon was less than a week old. He was still a child and needed time to grow to maturity. Clicking his tongue, Asterion observed the rider of the Chinese fireball. The young Asian woman had burns of varying degrees on her body, especially on the young Chinese woman's arms. The dragon beneath the young Chinese woman was even more miserable than she herself. Its red scales were blackened and melted. Painful roars came from Ancalagon's torn throat. The Chinese fireball didn't look well at all and its flight stability was severely weakened. It was a miracle that the dragon was still able to fly in such conditions, where the wing membrane was full of holes and missing parts. Asterion looked at the others and noticed that all 3 of them had their wands pointed at him. It was obvious that the 3 of them had saved the young woman from the Chinese team. Ancalagon abruptly descended, dropping altitude suddenly while the enemy dragons quickly followed behind without any delay. Asterion, although surprised by the dragon's movements, began to personally control the dragon while dodging the spells being cast at him. Zzzi. An electric bolt of magical energy tore through the air with an electric sound and passed over Asterion, almost hitting him by a few meters. Obviously it wasn't so easy to hit a spell while riding a dragon when the target was also riding a dragon. Asterion closed the dragon's wings and dived into freefall while slowing down, allowing the 4 dragons to pass him, leaving his enemies surprised by the sudden maneuver. Patriarch Black narrowed his eyes as his hair fluttered violently in the extremely strong wind. As they passed right by him, Asterion spread Ancalagon's wings again and was pulled back by the air current, but the wand in his hand moved precisely at the enemy's weakest link. The young Chinese girl is injured along with the Chinese fireball. Bombarda, a red beam emerged from the tip of Asterion's wand and almost immediately hit the young woman with a loud, deafening bang. What happens to the human body when a grenade is detonated near it? It basically destroys the body most of the time. Fortunately for young Ling Zhang, Asterion had aimed at the dragon, not the knight himself, or the story. Would have been completely different from what happened the instant after the bomb hit the dragon. Blood splashed into the air as a trill full of pain and agony sounded in the sky while the red dragon itself began to plunge towards the ground in an extremely tragic and sad scene. Asterion swung his wand again and applied a levitation spell to the girl, preventing her from falling to her death when she came into contact with the ground. But unlike the girl, the dragon fell to the ground, crashing into a sand dune and splashing the golden sands everywhere. Asterion suddenly raised his head and a black dragon appeared before him, its glowing yellow eyes staring with a bestial fury without any sanity. A flame 15 meters long gushed from the beast's mouth, an extremely hot flame that made the cold desert air warm up in mere moments. Asterion just leaned back as he watched the flame pass about 20 feelings from his face. The intense heat turned the Patriarch Black's naturally pale face slightly red. At the same time, Asterion felt the Hungarian horntail collide with Ancalagon violently, the 2 dragons becoming entangled in the air as a brutal and vicious fight unfolded with the purest violence imaginable. Although the Hungarian horntail was only 9 meters long, the dragon was worthy of being the most dangerous dragon in the wizarding world, and told everyone that size did not make ability. Rugrugur. The Hungarian horntail exchanged bites with Ancalagon while unleashing his flames directly onto the dragon's scales. Ancalagon responded with his flames while using his powerful legs to leave a brutal tear in the dragon's chest. The 2 flames mixed and clashed against each other, one tried to push the other away while trying to win the duel, and it was Ancalagon who emerged victorious. The Hungarian horntail's flame ran out and the dragon's mouth was flooded with black flames. Asterion seized the moment and pointed his wand towards the rider of the Hungarian horntail, who was the young Russian woman called Anastasia Romanova. With a quick twist of his wrist, a blue spell emerged from the wand, hitting the young woman who was off balance and barely holding herself in the cell as both dragons fought. Luckily for her, the dragon below her moved away slightly, but that movement was enough to knock Anastasia off Expelliarmus' collision course. Just as Asterion was about to unleash another spell, his body was violently shaken again. Another dragon had collided with Ancalagon and entered the brutal fray. Asterion looked to his left and saw a fat green dragon, the dragon's golden horn resembling a bull embedded in Ancalagon's scales and flesh. His rider was David Williams from the American team, and the young man didn't look happy at all. On the contrary, his gaze showed anger and hatred towards Asterion. It was the first time Ancalagon had been wounded in the fight and in his life, although it was a minor injury, he was still hurt. This completely irritated the huge black dragon with reddish scales. Ancalagon, under Asterion's surprised eyes, ignored Hungarian Horntail and focused entirely on Romanian Longhorn. Ancalagon used his body to push Romanian Longhorn away and opened his mouth, biting cruelly into the neck of the green dragon with golden horns. The black dragon bit down so hard that the Romanian Longhorn's one-third neck was torn straight off amid a painful trill from the green dragon. Vast quantities of blood fell from the sky and stained the sand dunes with dragon's blood. Ancalagon didn't stop there. In the midst of the freefall, the black dragon forced the dragon onto its stomach as it fell and tore the dragon apart with the claws of its feet, first ripping off the green dragon's wing and then tearing another chunk out of the magical beast's neck with one bite. The dragon cried out and struggled in the air. At that moment, the Romanian Longhorn's cell had broken because of Ancalagon's bite, which hit the ropes on the green dragon's neck. David, his eyes filled with horror, began a free fall towards the ground. Curiously enough, the speed at which you fall is not important and it doesn't even matter. What kills a person in free fall is the sudden stop. Any sudden acceleration or deceleration is fatal. If an airplane accelerates too quickly, the pilots could pass out, and if an airplane brakes suddenly, the passengers won't have a good day. Fortunately for David, Asterion didn't want to be disqualified and cast a levitation spell on the young man, but unfortunately Romanian Longhorn had a different fate. Due to the enormous loss of blood and the lack of a wing, when the dragon collided with the ground, it died at the same moment as the collision, killing the beautiful magical creature. Chapter 203 Golden Path 1. Asterion spun Ancalagon in the air as he passed dangerously between the two dragons, Catalonian Fireball and Hungarian Horntail, from the Japanese and Russian teams respectively. Flaming puffs tore the air around Patriarch Black as the flames blackened his clothes. His hair fluttered in the wind as sparks of flame lit up the night sky. Asterion instantly donned the black armor with red eyes and shielded himself from the intense heat thrown at him. The Hungarian Horntail was particularly fast despite its 9-meter length. Its rider, Natasha from the Russian team, was not an easy woman to deal with either. The Russian team's black dragon slid its slender, long neck through the air and instead of aiming at Ancalagon below Asterion, directed its huge mouth towards the cell where Asterion sat holding his wand. Asterion hadn't expected this flying lizard to dare aim at him, so when the dragon's huge mouth came dangerously close, the Black Patriarch could even see the flame building up at the bottom of the dragon's throat. Without any hesitation, Asterion deflected an Expelliarmus that was thrown at him by the Russian team member and aimed inside the dragon's mouth. Bombarda! He muttered, then a red flash emerged from the tip of his wand and almost instantly hit the inside of the dragon's mouth. Urfgwaawa! As a roar full of fury and wailing pain rang out in the sky, blood and flesh fell from the sky, staining the sandy ground with a layer of dark red. Asterion found himself free for a moment and separated from the enemy duo. He looked at the Hungarian Horntail and saw the state that the lethal spell had made of the dragon. The dragon was still flying through the air, its strong wings flapping to keep the creature aloft. It looked fine, but the same could not be said for the dragon's face. Half of the draconic face had disappeared at this point. Blood dripped down half of the still intact face. Asterion could see the teeth or what was left of them. It was a horribly bloody wound. Asterion didn't know if the dragon could live normally after the tournament, but he found it hard to believe. Healing potions might work with humans, but with dragons it was a completely different matter. Suddenly, A roar sounded next to Asterion and he saw Catalonian fireball spraying a jet of flame at Ancalagon, Asterion's vision obscured by the flame covering his entire figure. Ancalagon let out a pained roar, feeling his enemy's powerful flame melt his body and roast the dragon's own flesh and blood. Something the black and red dragon didn't take lightly, as he became even more furious. Without any hesitation on the part of the magical creature, Ancalagon crashed hard into the Catalonian fireball, causing both creatures to once again become entangled in a barbaric and vicious fight. But unlike the Hungarian horntail, which could go head-to-head with Ancalagon because of its 9-meter size and extremely warlike temperament, the Catalonian fireball didn't have these advantages. As well as being smaller, at around 7 meters long, its temperament wasn't as voracious or aggressive as the Hungarian horntail. What followed was the purest violence and brutality from Ancalagon against the Catalonian fireball dragon. The poor dragon, who was much smaller than his enemy, was torn apart as if he were nothing, his neck breaking under the cruel and brutal grip of Ancalagon's jaw. Aiko Nakamura, the daughter of the Japanese Minister of Magic, Satoshi Nakamura, watched in shock as the dragon died. She raised her wand towards Asterion with the intention of casting a spell, but the special grade wizard himself was even quicker than the girl. Confundus. Aiko felt her consciousness shatter and darkness took over in the next second, knocking her unconscious as she and the dragon fell to the ground dying together, or that would have been the case if it hadn't been for Asterion saving the young woman, and despite wanting to let the young woman die to make the Japanese Minister of Magic furious, he still saved her, but he wasn't at all gentle like the other two competitors he had already knocked to the sand, cancelling the spell lethally 10 meters before it hit the ground. Ancalagon dived towards the desert, ready to start another round of attacks, but either he or Asterion were surprised to notice that they weren't attacked as they plummeted dangerously close to the sand dunes. Patriarch Black looked up and saw a small shadow gradually receding over the horizon, leaving him stunned for a moment. After the surprise, Asterion's face was indifferent to the young Russian's escape, and if he thought about it, it was obvious that it was a very intelligent decision. Asterion and Ancalagon couldn't be defeated by 4 dragons, she alone would definitely suffer the same fate as the other 3. So, rather than make the Russian team even weaker by her loss, Natasha retreated without a second thought. You can call her a coward, but compared to victory, sacrificing her own reputation was no big deal in her eyes. Besides, she had discovered a lot about Asterion's dragon, information that she could use very well to make the mighty black and red dragon fall from the sky like a shooting star. Seeing the figure of the Russian team member disappearing over the horizon in the opposite direction to the north, Asterion looked away and controlled Ancalagon to continue north with no intention of pursuing the young woman. The dragon let out a roar full of dissatisfaction and was still furious at being wounded by someone he considered weak. Even so, he made a graceful turn in the air and headed north while the red eyes that resembled hot coals reflected a hidden rage in the gaze of the huge 15-meter-long creature. Asterion couldn't help but notice the blood dripping from Ancalagon's neck. The black scales not only showed a puncture wound but were partially melted, many showing signs of breaking at any moment. It was the Hungarian horntail's flames that made the scales melt, while the puncture wound was the work of American team member David Williams' Romanian Longhorn. The green dragon's golden horns pierced Ancalagon's neck, and although it wasn't a particularly serious wound, blood was oozing out of the puncture. Asterion frowned, but didn't order Ancalagon to stop to rest and tend to his wounds. The dragon possessed the blood of Morgan, the cursed spirit who had already begun the process of divinization. Ancalagon had abilities that he himself didn't know about. Asterion just wanted the dragon to learn on its own, just as a father would let his son fall and learn to get up on his own instead of asking for his mother's help. And the next scene before him made Asterion's lips lift in a satisfied smile. He saw the flesh on Ancalagon's wound begin to expand, and within moments, the wound was completely healed. Only the scales were still melted and broken in many places, something that needed time to regenerate without haste. "Good job, kid." With his hair fluttering in the wind and the strong sound of the wind breeze around him, Asterion stroked the beautiful creature's neck and spoke in a gentler tone, one he used for Baskerville. A gentle, caressing trill sounded from the dragon's throat as it flapped its great wings, propelling itself upwards and sailing between the air currents. Almost an hour into his flight, Asterion noticed an oasis again, and to his surprise, there was someone he knew very well. Chapter 204 Golden Path 2. A dragon covered in silver and grey scales was lying next to her. It was a large dragon, although smaller than Ancalagon, measuring about 10 meters in length. It was possibly the largest dragon apart from Ancalagon's dragon. Asterion noticed her incredibly blue eyes staring at him with a smiling and mischievous look. She looked beautiful in her equestrian clothes. Making Ancalagon pose in the oasis with a bang, Asterion jumped off the dragon and looked at his fiancée with a calm gaze. He took off his black armor with red eyes and put it away again. "Looks like you fought someone," she commented when she saw the state of the black and red dragon's scales. Moving closer, the white-haired girl stroked the dragon's long, slender neck affectionately while looking directly into Asterion's eyes. "For members of different teams, I took down 3 and 1 took advantage of me fighting and ran away," Asterion replied as he stretched, feeling lighter after a battle. A look of envy shone in her eyes, and letting out a disappointed sigh, she spoke with a helpless and slightly angry tone. "There was no one where I appeared. The large-scale teleportation technology was made by an amateur. You can make your contribution to the Wizarding Society later." Asterion rolled his eyes and looked at Rose's dragon. "Looks like the potion you were making worked." Rose looked at the Ukrainian Ironbelly and shook her head. She commented with a calm look. "I didn't get anywhere near what I intended. The potion merely accelerated its growth, which was far from my expectations. Apart from the size, the effects were minimal, although the side effects were milder than expected." Asterion nodded. It really wasn't easy to create a potion capable of purifying a being's bloodline. After all, we're talking about altering a being's DNA and returning it to its original state. Unfortunately, it's easy to say, it's hard to do. "It doesn't matter, you've had less than a week to prepare something like this. In time you'll be able to perfect the potion." Asterion confronted Rose, who looked at him with a surprised expression. Smiling, Rose couldn't help but find it cute that Asterion was comforting her, something that would never happen before. He would probably make fun of her as his way of encouraging her to improve. Approaching Asterion, Rose wrapped her arms around his waist and claimed a chaste kiss on his lips. Reluctantly parting their lips, Rose spoke with a proud tone tinged with a touch of tenderness. "Thank you for the words, darling." Asterion rolled his eyes and no longer cared about being a knight, looking at Rose with a touch of helplessness. At Hogwarts, in the Quidditch Stadium, Dumbledore, calmly sipping a cup of tea with lemon drops, glanced casually at the two of them kissing and focused his gaze on another screen. He laughed, thinking he was seeing things. After all, it wasn't possible for Rose to kiss Asterion. Bringing his cup to his lips, Dumbledore looked at the previous screen again. His smile stiffened. He choked on his tea when he saw that Asterion and Rose really were kissing. It wasn't a fucking hallucination. What the fuck? The wizard, considered the most powerful in the world, couldn't help swearing out loud at what he was seeing on the Quidditch screen at that moment. The man stood up from his chair in complete disbelief at the scene. Dumbledore felt his mind spinning, and he slumped back in his chair, his eyes dull for a moment. His mind was filled with images of Rose and Asterion together. Nice going, Asterion. Good move, boy. Dumbledore muttered to himself with a calm look, but behind his gaze, a white flame full of madness burned like never before. In his eyes, Asterion had seduced Rose behind his back. Dumbledore wanted to crack Rose's head open to see if she really had the brains to fall for Asterion's flirtation. The clock tower marshal could already imagine the senators and lords sending letters asking why their future leader was delighting in the lips of his greatest enemy. Dumbledore wanted to let out a pained groan as he felt the huge storm of letters coming towards him. In the stands, the crowd began to whistle, teasing the teenage couple kissing on the big screen. Meanwhile, all the Gryffindor and Slytherin fans were strangely silent. Ron Weasley in particular was completely pale and trembling. How did it feel to see the girl you liked kissing your biggest enemy? How could she do something like that to Gryffindor? He gritted his teeth and thought with a colossal rage building up in his chest and consuming his sanity. Slytherin was completely silent. Everyone stared at the screen and then at Daphne, expecting the girl to explode with rage at any moment. The girls in particular were about to mock Daphne for not being able to hold on to her own husband, but then they all saw the smile on Daphne's lips. It stunned everyone. Even Tracy looked at her friend with a surprised look. Knowing Daphne for so long, she knew her friend's temper very well. So, to see Daphne smiling and acting so calm in the face of Asterion's blatant betrayal, caused the girl shock and confusion. Then, under the surprised eyes of everyone in Slytherin, Daphne spoke calmly. Asterion and I have decided to marry Rose. Daphne dropped a bombshell in the minds of everyone in Slytherin. At least the descendants of the noble houses knew the scandal this would bring to their society. Everyone looked at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's eyes. By Morgana's sagging breasts, as if in Merlin's name, Rose and Asterion are kissing. Sirius, in his dog form, stared at the scene of Rose kissing Asterion in complete disbelief. He tried to close his eyes and open them again, but the image of the kiss was still on the big screen in the Quidditch stadium. Remembering the disgust James had felt about Regulus, he could imagine his now deceased friend turning over in his coffin, full of rage and fury at seeing his daughter in the arms of the son of the person he hated the most. Oh James, it seems that fate likes to play with us. Who would have thought that your daughter would be dating the son of your greatest enemy? Sirius whispered to himself, but he couldn't hide the pride he felt at seeing Asterion with two beautiful girls at the same time. Worthy of being my nephew, he honored me and his father at the same time. Sirius thought with an extremely arrogant and narcissistic look, without noticing Narcissa's increasingly cold eyes falling on him. The girl has the nerve to kiss an engaged man in front of hundreds of thousands of wizards and witches from all over the world. Andromeda spoke in surprise at Rose's audacity. She had wanted to have that courage when she was young. Narcissa looked at Sirius with a cold, deadly gaze, almost murderous. In her eyes, Sirius had influenced Asterion. This caused an unconscionable fury to well up in the platinum-haired woman's chest. But she didn't just blame Sirius. Rose had seduced Asterion and had just made the entire political landscape of England shake like a magnitude 8 earthquake. Just like Dumbledore, she could only imagine how many letters they would receive tomorrow. Chapter 205 Golden Path 3. Rose looked up at the night sky and frowned. They had been waiting for 15 minutes, but there was no sign of another participant approaching. That's strange. Even though astrology isn't a very popular class, everyone can still recognize Ursa Minor. There were supposed to be more participants heading north at this time, but there aren't any. Asterion frowned at this. Just as Rose had said, there were supposed to be a lot more people heading north at the moment, but there was no one around within a 10-kilometer radius. Luna didn't show up either. Rose's expression was worried at the thought of the delicate blonde-haired girl. Especially Luna's dragon wasn't exactly the most gentle of dragons. Even if he was drugged like other dragons, it wasn't an easy task to control such a large and temperamental being. I'm not worried about Luna. If she wants to escape, not even a special grade wizard can stop the girl from escaping successfully. Asterion commented nonchalantly about the seer's situation. He really didn't see how the participants could hit Luna with her powers. She could escape before the ambush even happened. After all, if it were that easy to ambush a seer, Grindelwald would probably have been arrested decades ago. However, as you may have noticed, the Dark Lord was free and doing as he pleased. With this in mind, Asterion no longer waited for Luna to arrive. He turned and looked at the largest tree in the oasis, and as he had imagined, the shape of the Little Dipper was reflected in the moonlight. It looks like it's further north, Asterion said, his eyes shining as he thought of something. What if it's under the sand? Rose, standing next to her fiancé, couldn't help but be surprised by his words. If that's true, how could dragons navigate the sands? That's the million-pound question. We won't know until we get to the north. Asterion spoke, walking towards Ancalagon. Rose shook her head and headed towards the dragon itself. There was no point in thinking about it now. They had to get to the north first, as Asterion had said earlier. Both dragons rose from the ground and shook their bodies, scattering the sand trapped in their bodies. Rose and Asterion were fine, firmly stuck in their cells while the dragons shook. On top of the dragon, Rose looked at Asterion and saw that he was much taller than her, which was understandable given Ancalagon's size, but, as someone who was competitive, she didn't like the feeling that her dragon wasn't as powerful as his. You have to eat a lot to get bigger, Oberon. You won't be able to find a wife with Ancalagon around. All the females will just look at him. You have to work hard, you lazy dragon. Rose muttered to the dragon she had named Oberon, the king of the fairies. The dragon let out a high-pitched trill and ignored her words, his eyes fixed on Ancalagon like an extremely hot gaze, as if he were seeing a beautiful woman, or in his case, a beautiful male dragon. This action made Rose's smile stiffen, and she stared at the dragon in disbelief. She hadn't expected her dragon to like men. If Rose had read more about dragons, she wouldn't have been surprised at her dragon's sexuality. Ancient dragons didn't care about the gender of a race. As long as it had a hole, they had a purpose. As descendants of these dragons, modern dragons, although not as sexually active as their genitors, have still retained some traces of their ancient lineage. Shaking her head, Rose put these thoughts aside for the moment and watched as Asterion took off from the ground riding Ancalagon. She followed right behind without wasting any time. They both had to find the golden path and maybe Luna, if she met her on the way. Asterion looked down and saw that they were at least a kilometer above the desert, a height not allowed in the tournament, but as it was night, even if there were muggles in the desert at that moment, they would only see a small black dot in the night sky. They might even be mistaken for birds. Looking back, he saw the silver dragon with grayish tones behind him, and in the cell, there was Rose with her short hair fluttering in the wind. In her eyes, she was having fun flying the dragon. Suddenly, Asterion and Rose's faces turned at the same time, looking north with expressions clearly showing surprise. They both felt an aura of a special grade cursed spirit. Then, under his surprised eyes, an orange mushroom cloud rose into the sky. If he hadn't felt the negative magical energy, Asterion would have thought he was seeing a nuclear attack. A heatwave swept through the surroundings a few minutes after the explosion, turning the desert into a plain wherever the shockwave passed, destroying the huge golden sand dunes. At the same time, a sandstorm began to form on the horizon, heading north. Glancing at each other in the air, Rose and Asterion saw each other's intention and sped even faster towards the north. They sensed that the golden path was where the special grade cursed spirit was located. As they both went deeper into the desert, gradually the landscape began to change. Glass began to appear on the surface of the desert, showing that the impact of the previous explosion was getting closer and closer. And when they arrived at the site of the explosion, Asterion noticed a huge building rising from the golden sands, or rather the glass around it. It looked like a huge city from ancient times. In the center of the city, two pillars held up a huge gold ring in the shape of the sun. Even at night, the whole city was illuminated by the gold ring that did the sun's work. But whether it was Rose or Asterion, they didn't care about the city. Their eyes were entirely focused on the huge monster entrenched among the city. It looked like a huge grotesque worm with rings on its huge soft and sticky body. It was all red while the worm's mouth resembled a hole filled with huge teeth. Every time the worm's body contracted, incredible amounts of heat spread throughout the city, which seemed completely intact despite the intense heat waves capable of easily melting iron. Note, something like the dune sand worm, Rose and Asterion's eyes began to glow intensely. Asterion's eyes in particular showed two black pentagrams spinning in his eyes, both of which analyzed the entire special grade cursed spirit. Rose frowned at the incredible amount of information. This is definitely not part of the tournament. This cursed spirit was born in this city. There's no way Dumbledore chose this place to be the Golden Path. No, this really is the Golden Way. The golden ring in the center of town is full of modern runes from the Fleur network. Asterion commented, looking at the golden ring erected by the two pillars in the middle of the mythical city. It was the same technology that brought them to this desert in the first place. How could Dumbledore not have noticed a special grade cursed spirit in that city? Rose spoke with incredulity evident in her voice. No special grade wizard could not sense a special grade cursed spirit. It was too obvious not to notice fluctuations of negative magical energy in the air. Maybe it was sealed away, and when the city was dug up, it broke free or was placed here after Dumbledore left. Rose spoke. She narrowed her eyes and looked at the special grade cursed spirit with a cold stare. She remembered the wizards who attacked Hogwarts, especially that special grade wizard who wanted her eyes to fulfill his crazy dream of finding the root of all magic. Asterion frowned and couldn't help but think of Mustafa or Herpo, whatever you want to call him. He knew the man wouldn't give up on achieving his goals. The Horcrux maker really was a difficult opponent to face, especially when he was in the dark and he was in the sunlight. What are you going to do? If a fight takes place in this place, perhaps the portal will be destroyed. Rose asked, feeling a headache coming on. Whether it was her or Asterion, they both had most of the large-scale attacks, and even if they restricted the power of his attacks, do you think a cursed spirit would do something similar? Can you teleport the cursed spirit somewhere else? Asterion asked, his voice also carrying a touch of helplessness. In the end, not everything could be solved with force. Rose looked at the worm that was at least a few kilometers long and another 50 thick. She hesitantly nodded to Asterion, confirming that she could do it. It's possible, but with the amount of magical energy I'm limited to, it's possible that I could make a mistake and start a fight in the city. Not only did she have to accurately calculate the spatial coordinates while carrying an extremely heavy and large monster, which practically doubled the difficulty of the action. What's more, with the amount of magical energy she had, she could run out for several minutes before regenerating completely. Do it, I'll protect you in any case. Asterion spoke with a serious look. He looked at the cursed spirit and thought about how long he could exorcise such a being with the grade 2 strength he was limited to at the moment. I can cheat if possible. Morgan could resolve the situation discreetly by becoming invisible. Asterion muttered to himself with an increasingly determined look on his face. Chapter 206 Battle in Desert City 1. Mounted on the dragon, Rose raised both hands and almost brought them together as if she were holding an invisible ball. Her eyes were brighter than ever. A gigantic equation began to form in her mind. An equation that involved manipulating space over large areas while jointly calculating the weight and mass of the object she wanted to send away. Without the red worm noticing that it was being targeted, the space where the worm was began to shrink in a way that was almost visible to the naked eye. Each time the space shrank, so did the space between Rose's hands. Sweat began to trickle down her face as she tried to concentrate, feeling the massive headache ravaging her brain at the moment. Seeing Rose's pained expression, Asterion's face turned grim. Under normal conditions he could put an end to this cursed spirit by summoning one of his cursed spirits like the fate serpent Ouroboros or even the dimension-devouring Almisa Mercury, but both of these summons were special-grade cursed spirits that expended insane amounts of magical energy to be summoned into the real world. Honestly, if he wanted to, he could summon one of the two. It wouldn't be as strong as it normally was, but it was enough to fight a special-grade cursed spirit. But Asterion didn't. He looked at Rose struggling and decided not to summon Almisa Mercury. Don't misunderstand, he didn't want to see Rose get hurt, but as he had promised earlier, he had to protect Rose, who, once she had finished teleporting the special-grade cursed spirit, would take a few minutes to regenerate her magical energy reserves. A period that would be no different from that of a muggle without magical energy. Suddenly, Rose let out a pained groan and accidentally, her hands touched, closing the ball with her hands. As the space followed the movement of Rose's hands, it obviously moved when she closed her hands, but this time, it wasn't gentle and invisible at all. The space seemed to turn into two gigantic invisible walls, trapping the worm-like cursed spirit. Naturally, sensing that it was trapped, the special-grade cursed spirit did what any being would do when it found itself trapped and immobilized. It began to struggle violently in an attempt to break free. And the more it struggled, the whole city seemed to shake under the creature's enormous weight. A crimson light ran through its body extremely quickly. The next second, a flash appeared in the center of the city, like a second sun shining brightly. After the flash came the deafening sound that seemed to herald the end of the world, and along with the sound, a gigantic wave of heat swept over everything around. Asterion and Rose, who had already sensed the imminent danger, didn't care about anything else and retreated with both dragons. However, as the dragons weren't as fast as the riders themselves, the distance of the retreat wasn't far enough, nor was the height, causing the heat wave to hit Asterion and Rose full on. Rose quickly covered Oberon with her limitless and protected the dragon in time, but Asterion let himself be hit as he made his own armor cover the entire dragon instead of himself. At the same moment, Asterion felt his flesh burning and his blood evaporating as an extremely white flash blurred his vision. A second later, the heat wave passed them by as everything returned to normal. Rose looked at Asterion and couldn't help but open her eyes in utter horror and disbelief. It was no wonder she had such a look on her face. Asterion's condition was grave to say the least. A large part of his body was covered in burns of the highest degree, his flesh was blackened and dried blood covered almost his entire body. He remained upright on the dragon, the cell had already turned into nothing at this point. Breathing heavily, Asterion looked down at his body, but what he saw was only darkness. At that moment, he was completely blind. It was a feeling he perhaps never thought he would have in his life, the complete deprivation of one of his senses, sight. Before Asterion could do anything, he felt himself being hugged. Although he was extremely sore from the act of being hugged, it brought some clarity to his mind. "Are you all right, Asti?" He heard Rose's voice full of concern tinged with an overwhelming guilt in her tone. A guilt that Asterion didn't understand. She had already said that it couldn't work and they had both agreed to take the risk. Not answering Rose, Asterion muttered in an extremely weak voice as he still stood erect on the dragon's neck. "Baskerville." Under Rose's shocked eyes, all the skin on Asterion's body began to recover at a speed to the naked eye. Second later, Asterion fully intact with no shirt and almost no pants appeared in front of her. Opening his eyes, Asterion looked at his hands and seeing the clear, clean image again, he breathed a sigh of relief. Although he knew he could regenerate thanks to the Baskerville, he still felt a little apprehensive in the face of blindness. Asterion grabbed a couple of changes of clothes from the Baskerville space and got dressed under Rose's shocked and curious eyes. Somewhat understandably, she had just seen him almost die. At the same time, he himself couldn't help but notice how fragile humans are. Even though he was one of the strongest, in the face of a magical attack, his flesh was completely insignificant. This feeling of helplessness for a strong man like him equally unnerving, a thought appeared in his mind. Should I follow that insane plan? No. I don't want to be Leto too. Asterion thought of something, but dismissed the thought the instant it appeared. Note, if you understand the reference and have read the Dune books, no spoilers. Turning to look at Rose, who was on Ancalagon still showing a guilty expression, he simply jabbed her in the forehead, making the white-haired girl hold her own forehead and show a pained expression. Stop blaming yourself for something normal, we knew it could go wrong, we bear the consequences of our actions, Rose. Asterion ignored the dissatisfied look coming from the girl and spoke in a calm tone. Rose rolled her eyes and muttered unsatisfactorily to herself. It hurt a lot, and I was only worried about you. Ignoring an upset Rose, Asterion's eyes focused back on the desert city, his eyes fixed on the huge special-grade cursed spirit in the shape of a worm. A cold look passed through Asterion's eyes. It was the second being that had caused him to suffer such a high degree of injury in his life, the first being Salazar Slytherin. Honestly, Asterion no longer cared if the entire city was destroyed, he would kill that damn worm. Rose, focus on recovering your magical energy, I'm going to exorcise that special-grade cursed spirit. Making his armor return to his body, Asterion didn't look at Rose and spoke in a calm voice. Without waiting for her reply, he flew without Ancalagon towards the city while the red cloak on his shoulders fluttered in the wind. You always like to have all the fun. Rose gave a disgruntled pout at Asterion's words, but didn't move and focused on recovering her magical energy. Although it wasn't empty, it was dangerously close. Now that I think about it, it'll probably be the first live exorcism of a special grade spirit. A smile appeared on Rose's lips at the thought of this. Even if she wasn't the shrewdest politician in the world, she could see the benefit of something like this. She could imagine that the status of a special grade wizard will be even more dazzling. In the wizarding world after this exorcism, the reason for Rose assuming something like this was simple: the population will know that all special grade wizards fight against these extremely powerful and destructive aberrations, which could destroy a city so easily. It may not sound like much, but don't forget that the witch population has rarely seen a special grade wizard or even once seen a special grade cursed spirit fighting in person. Special grade in the eyes of most people in the world was a distant scenario that they never had the chance to observe. Now, they could get a taste of what it was like. Chapter 207 Battle in Desert City 2. Asterion, floating above the city, looked down with his red eyes, his gaze fixed on the huge creature entrenched in the bowels of the ancient desert city. At that moment, he already knew that this city was very special, because even an all-out attack by a special grade cursed spirit, the entire city was still perfectly intact. The special grade cursed spirit that Asterion called the sandworm seemed to sense the wizard above the city, as the worm began to move, accumulating energy with its body and sending waves of heat towards Asterion above the city. Baskerville. Asterion stretched out his hand and a huge curtain of pure darkness formed in front of him. From the huge curtain of darkness, a gigantic dog with hundreds of eyes emerged from the curtain of darkness with its mouth open, showing its gigantic, sharp teeth. In a single mouthful, Baskerville swallowed the attacks and smiled sadistically as he let out an evil laugh into the air. Knowing the trash that dared to hurt his master, he simply manifested himself in the real world in his true terrifying form. A huge black dog with red eyes all over its body. Feeling the consumption of magical energy, Asterion frowned at Baskerville. His intention was to summon Baskerville for a moment and start fighting Sandverve head-on, but the demon dog had different plans. However, sensing the colossal fury in the demon dog, Asterion didn't undo the summoning and flew at the special grade cursed spirit entrenched in the city. He also wanted to vent the anger he was feeling at being so seriously injured. In an instant, Asterion, clad in his armor, appeared above the cursed spirit while holding a sword that could cut magic at an atomic level. He looked coldly at the monster and struck a blow at the sandworm. A gash almost 100 meters wide appeared on the worm's long soft body, a huge geyser of blood spewed into the sky, bathing the nearby houses in a cloud of purple blood. A sharp, painful roar came from the worm. However, its roar soon stopped. Baskerville had attacked the special grade cursed spirit without any hesitation. The demon dog had bitten into what would have been the monster's neck, digging its teeth into the worm's soft, sticky flesh. The demon dog began to devour the worm as it squirmed to escape. Not only that, it began to devour even the enemy's negative magical energy as if it were sucking water through a straw. Taking advantage of the time, Asterion began to attack with his sword, delivering blow after blow, tearing into the body of the cursed spirit. Asterion noticed that the more the worm moved, the rings of flesh on its body seemed to glow with a crimson sheen, as if it was generating energy at every moment, and this energy could be used by the worm. But there was something strange. It didn't seem to be an innate technique, something that humans and cursed spirits possessed in a similar way, but different. The worm's heat generation was more like a natural process than a technique of its own. Another point he noticed was that the cursed spirit wasn't regenerating as it should be. It was too slow. Even a grade 4 cursed spirit could regenerate faster than the worm. Almost as if it were artificially made. Asterion swung his sword and muttered to himself with an increasingly incredulous and shocked look on his face. What's the concept of creating special grade cursed spirits artificially? If everyone was like the worm, a civilization could have infinite batteries. Looking at the city, Asterion wondered which civilization it belonged to. The most famous civilization in deserts was Egypt itself, but although the civilization had its unique magical characteristics, they were nowhere near creating special grade cursed spirits artificially. Asterion put these thoughts aside and focused on the moment. He had to destroy the special grade cursed spirit before it exploded once again. He was pretty sure that the Muggle army hadn't come to check the explosions because the local wizard government was preventing it. He had to hurry, or even with a perfect excuse, he could make countless Muggles suspect that there was something supernatural at the scene. Unfortunately, he wasn't in the United States, or he could leave such things to the conspiracists who think everything has to do with little green men in space. Baskerville, knowing Asterion's intentions, his 100 eyes narrowed with sick pleasure as he accelerated his actions, immobilizing the worm as it devoured everything in its path without showing any sign that it would stop anytime soon. Picking up his wand, Asterion stuck it into one of the wounds he had made himself and began to operate large amounts of magical energy. It would be a fairly powerful Maxima Bombarda, although not at the level that could destroy a cursed spirit. But with the energy already accumulated by the worm, it would be enough to kill the special grade cursed spirit. Maxima Bombarda. Asterion muttered to himself as he flicked his wrist submerged in the cursed spirit's flesh and blood. Before the explosion, Asterion apparat away, and the moment his feet touched the glass outside the city, he heard a deafening explosion and the ground beneath him shook like an earthquake. It felt like the earth was alive, moving everywhere while the whole world seemed to spin. Note: I've never felt an earthquake in my 23 years, so I don't know what it's like when one happens. Let me know if I'm wrong. Looking up, Asterion watched as a second sun was created by him in the middle of the desert. It was gigantic and colossal, an energy ball of pure magical energy and heat rising into the sky like a star. Asterion prepared himself for the strong winds and intense heat, but to his surprise, it never happened. It seemed that all the remnants of the explosion had completely disappeared, which confused him for a moment, but he didn't care anymore. Dumbledore will have a hard time explaining that, but it's not my problem. Asterion muttered to himself as he watched the ball of light gradually dissipate and the atmosphere gradually return to normal. Suddenly, a crash was heard next to him. Asterion saw that it was Oberon and Ancalagon, with Rose still sitting on his dragon. I must say, that was quite a show. Rose jumped off Ancalagon and landed on the ground next to Asterion. She looked at her fiancé and commented with a hint of envy in her voice. Although it didn't last long, it was really cool to watch. It was like watching an action-packed movie. Asterion didn't speak and used his few reserves of magical energy to apparate into the city again. Looking at the still-living worm, Asterion showed no reaction and held out his hand. A huge blue dome appeared covering the worm's entire exploded body, gradually melting it into a crimson ball in Patriarch Black's hands. Watching the orb in his hand, Asterion couldn't help but narrow his eyes. It's really artificial, he muttered to himself while still finding the idea of creating a special grade cursed spirit incredible. Something wrong, Asti? Asterion heard Rose's voice behind him. Turning to face her, he asked, "What do you make of that?" Rose looked at the crimson orb with curiosity. Asterion hadn't hidden how the innate technique worked from him, he had even demonstrated it to her and explained the horrible taste to her, an unnecessary part that she didn't want to remember. Looking at the orb, Rose gradually frowned. Don't misunderstand, it was a legitimate special grade cursed spirit, but this one was different. The unique characteristic of a cursed spirit was the chaos that formed their bodies and minds. But the orb in Asterion's hand seemed too orderly to be a normal cursed spirit. It's artificial, Asterion said, making Rose widen her eyes in complete disbelief. Creating a cursed spirit through an innate technique was acceptable, but creating a cursed spirit artificially, and a special grade one at that, was too shocking. Chapter 208 On the Night of the Storm, 1, at Hogwarts, in the Quidditch Stadium. All the wizards and witches were in complete silence watching the exorcism of a special grade wizard. Whether man, woman, child or elderly, all eyes were fixed on a single screen, all other fights completely overshadowed by the scene before them. Seeing the explosion that could easily destroy a city, they all had the same question in their minds. Can humans really fight against a being capable of destroying entire cities with one attack? How had they survived after so long? Their answer came in the form of a black-haired, red-eyed boy. Under their watchful eyes, the special grade cursed spirit was completely beaten without being able to fight back. A being they had assumed to be invincible was killed as if he were no different from any other cursed spirit. Destroyed, torn apart and devoured as if it were nothing more than an insignificant being. Damn, is that what my nephew fights? Sirius spoke with a completely shocked tone. It wasn't just him who was shocked, Narcissa and Andromeda were equally shocked at the power of the cursed spirit. Although Narcissa had witnessed Asterion and Voldemort's fight, she had only seen the attacks when both sides weren't focused on causing destruction, but on causing damage to each other, so seeing such destruction still caused a shock to the former Lady Malfoy. Knowing that Asterion was fighting these monsters and returning home calmly after his missions made Narcissa frown. She felt a little guilty for not seeing that he might be tired after the whole mission. Not that she didn't before, but since Asterion was always so relaxed after missions, she assumed it was an easy mission, so she never did anything to make him relax after a mission. Now it seems she was wrong. Ophelia, Gina and Astoria looked at the screen with wide eyes full of admiration for Asterion. Unlike the adults, the three of them were amazed at the strength Asterion showed, especially when he summoned the gigantic dog with hundreds of eyes, which swallowed the cursed spirit's attacks. Incredible! Astoria spoke with an extremely bright look of admiration. How could she not? Everyone admired the strong. It was something natural in the world and even stronger in the wizarding world where death was not a rare occurrence in missions to exorcise cursed spirits. Ginny and Ophelia agreed with Astoria's words. It was a side of Asterion they hadn't seen before. Staying close to Asterion while he relaxed and chatted casually with them made people forget that he was a special grade wizard, the pinnacle of humanity. The state of wonder and awe was not exclusive to the three girls, the whole of Slytherin was equally full of admiration. They respected strength above all else and Asterion embodied everything the English nobility wanted, a powerful English nobleman. However, Daphne was more upset than surprised. Instead of watching in awe, she wanted to be by his side fighting this kind of monster, especially after seeing the horrible injuries he had suffered. Seeing Asterion's condition like that made her almost cry and want to run and hug him. Even after she had recovered in an instant, she still couldn't get the image of Asterion so badly injured out of her mind. She would perhaps never forget seeing him so badly hurt for the first time in her life. I want to be strong too. Daphne muttered to herself, the sense of helplessness only growing inside her as she watched the special grade cursed spirit being exorcised by his fiancée. In the VIP grandstands, something that everyone was in awe of, the 6 special grade wizards in the place weren't surprised. Although cursed spirits were powerful, they had little intelligence and couldn't leave their place of origin, which made it easy to contain and damage surrounding property with a simple barrier. But they saw something that all the hundreds of thousands of wizards and witches in the stands didn't see. Is it just me? Or does it seem like the special grade cursed spirit was strange? Benjamin, president of Makusa, spoke with an uncertain tone. A look that was shared by all the special grade wizards and witches in the room. Even Dumbledore frowned, remembering the actions and how the negative magical energy of the worm-shaped cursed spirit worked. When he checked the city in the desert, which was discovered by wizard archaeologists, he definitely didn't sense any special grade wizard on the site. But like all the other wizards on the site, he also noticed something strange. The workings of the negative magical energy were more like a natural process than magic itself. It resembled the natural process of eels that were able to release electrical discharges. Although the concept was different, the purpose was the same. This made him suspicious of things he hadn't wanted to believe were real before. He wanted to believe that mere myths written by an amateur writer wanting to cause chaos. Unfortunately, possible proof that the book was correct lay before him. The other ministers of magic who weren't special grade seemed confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. By the way, this city really did remain intact in the face of such a powerful attack. Its composition is really different. Leaving aside the artificial creation of cursed spirits, Rose commented with an admiring look at the ancient city. Just as Asterion was about to answer Rose, he looked up and saw a small black dot rapidly approaching them. In addition to the dragon, he sensed a familiar magical aura. She's finally here, Rose said, looking up at the sky to see the silver-blue dragon getting brighter and brighter in the distance. It was a very beautiful dragon, although not as beautiful as Antipodean Opali, it was more beautiful than her and Asterion's dragons. Both dragons were stronger and more ferocious than beautiful. Under Asterion and Rose's eyes, the dragon with the short snout landed near them and an elven-looking girl without long ears jumped off the dragon and fell to the ground with surprising grace. It was Luna, and by the look of her, the girl hadn't had an easy ride so far, Asterion noticing wounds on her dragon while Luna's clothes were blackened in places, showing that she had fought in the battle. Looks like you had a good time, Rose commented, looking at Luna's appearance. There was a hint of envy in her voice. Asterion had fought 4 enemies while Luna had also taken part in a battle, only she hadn't fought so far. She wondered if there was some conspiracy around her. Although the number of competitors was actually smaller than in the King's game, there were at least 25 wizards and witches. It was as if they were all avoiding her. If having fun is escaping from 3 other dragon riders, then yes, I had fun, Luna commented in a tired voice. Her dragon was an Ancalagon, who could fight 4 dragons at once. There was nothing special about her dragon, and in a group fight, the one with the most hands is almost always the winner. Luna's almost silver-blue eyes looked at the city with a touch of curiosity. She could see Egyptian architecture mixed with Mesopotamian culture and something even more, a culture she didn't recognize. Let's go, I want to finish this damn race as soon as possible, Asterion spoke, his voice calm but somewhat helpless. The tournament was getting more and more complicated. He felt that in the last test, he would be thrown into a damn scary labyrinth full of monsters and a poisonous fog. The other participants could also arrive at any moment. Rose, standing next to him, also spoke with a touch of seriousness in her eyes. Even if they were powerful, the dragons couldn't take on too many dragons at once, it was suicide. And once the dragons died, the knights would automatically be disqualified from the second trial of the tournament. You don't have to worry about that, they're not stupid enough to come this way in a short time. Luna commented in a carefree voice as she tried to make her scorched clothes look good. Asterion and Rose looked at Luna in confusion. Rolling her eyes, she looked at them both wordlessly and replied in a strange voice. Do you think everyone is a special grade wizard or witch? Only a fool would run into a special grade cursed spirit. No grade 1 wizard or witch would be crazy enough to carry out such a suicidal attack. Besides, you have to be a semi-special grade wizard to try to exorcise a special grade cursed spirit. You seem to lack common sense among the wizards and witches of the world. Luna finished, looking at them both with a reproachful gaze. Asterion and Rose took notice, and it was as Luna had said, no one would really go up against a special grade cursed spirit if they were weak. Although it was common sense, it was something that Asterion and Rose did all the time. After all, they were special grade, so unconsciously, they assumed that everyone would do the same as them. Still, let's go, the further we get, the safer we'll be. I don't want to underestimate the determination of the other participants. The Japanese team especially, kamikaze attacks are really problematic. Asterion commented with a frown, remembering that he had knocked out the Japanese team captain in the previous fight. Luna and Rose nodded and everyone went to their respective dragons. Once in the air, all 3 dragons passed through the golden ring in the shape of the sun. The moment they crossed, green flames consumed them and they disappeared from the desert. When Asterion opened his eyes again, he found himself in front of an immense blue. Above him, lightning ransacked the sky and the deafening sound of thunder rumbled in the sky. He was at sea in front of a gigantic storm. Chapter 209 On the night of the storm, 2. With the resounding sound of thunder, Asterion balanced himself on the dragon while Ancalagon was thrown slightly backwards by the 150 km/h winds. Even the dragon seemed to have trouble moving in the face of a storm. The rain felt like a snake bite when it touched the skin of Asterion's face. Turning his face to look at the horizon, he saw that the inky sea seemed to be covered in stormy clouds, lightning dancing in the clouds like serpents before tearing through the air with brutality in mere moments. Waves of 9 meters broke on the sea and became even bigger again. At the same time, a tornado linked the sky and the sea in a waterspout capable of frightening even the most voracious sailor. A truly apocalyptic scene. Asterion recognized where he was. He had already exorcised a special grade cursed spirit in this infernal sea off the coast of Brittany in France, although he had not entered French territory. Sea of Iroise. Frowning, Asterion looked around, but apart from the darkness of the night and the dripping rain nearby, there was no one beside him. Rose and Luna were missing and probably knew nothing of their surroundings or even where they were. At that moment, like Rose, he also cursed the technology of mass apparition. It still needed a lot of polishing to be used in case a war happened. Suddenly, Asterion's eyes caught a flash of red light in the corner of his vision. Turning his head, he noticed the red flash again, but this time, he realized it was magic. Someone calling for help or trying to locate themselves in the storm. As there was only Rose and Luna, Asterion assumed it was one of the 2 women. However, the place where she was very dangerous. It was practically next to the water spout. Ancalagon, who didn't need Asterion's orders, moved his body through the strong winds and approached the spot, struggling to remain stable in the face of the extremely strong and brutal winds, although something like this proved to be a difficult task. As he got closer to one of the most energetic events on the planet, Asterion could feel the wind increasing and the amount of water in the air was simply colossal. The pain of the water droplets turned from a snakebite to sharp knives, a considerable pain, to the point of forcing him to resummon his armor. After all, unlike Ancalagon, he had no natural scales to protect him from too much damage. Drawing his wand, Asterion managed to raise his arm because of the armor. He chanted a spell in the next second. A bolt of crimson lightning shot out from the tip of his wand and tore through the air with electric bursts and spread for miles. He made the spell as thin as possible so that it would travel a greater distance, practically shouting everywhere that he was in that place. His response was a blue spell letting Asterion know who the unlucky girl was to be teleported next to a water spout in the middle of a storm in one of the planet's violent seas. It was Luna. As Asterion expected, he located Luna's magical aura and her dragon. Knowing the exact location of the seer, he put a huge protego around Ancalagon, helping him to fly in the storm, and rushed to the scene. Luna's dragon wasn't as strong as Ancalagon or Oberon de Rose. It was a normal dragon, and in the face of the force of nature, a hatchling dragon definitely couldn't withstand much in the face of one of the most energetic weather events on the planet. After a few minutes that seemed too long in his perception, Asterion saw a silver-blue streak in the air not far from him, but at that moment, he noticed that he was just under 50 meters from the water spout. Even the protego that protected Ancalagon was deformed in the face of the extremely strong winds and water trying to drag it down and swallow it whole. Knowing that he couldn't go on like this or he would be dragged into the water spout, Asterion summoned his special grade cursed spirit, Saddlemelicalbus. Asterion muttered and a 10-meter curtain of smoke appeared behind him, from which emerged a humanoid cursed spirit, if it weren't for the tail in place of the cursed spirit's legs. Saddlemelicalbus looked like a human woman with blue skin and long hair made of water, which rippled like waves on the sea. Her generous bust was hidden by 2 white shells. But unlike a normal human woman, instead of legs like any normal person, there was a fishtail covered in blue ladders full of beauty and brilliance. In her hand, she held a golden trident. She looked like a sea goddess full of sacredness rather than a cursed spirit. Saddlemelic was about 10 meters tall, her enormous body like a masterpiece made by the gods. His tail moved with surprisingly graceful movements, and a voice reminiscent of a mermaid's song hung in the air. Saddlemelic seemed very happy with the current environment, and knowing her mission, the cursed spirit swung her trident, making the water in 100 meters practically bow before her. The range would normally be kilometers, but as Asterion wanted to save magical energy, he decreased the range. Under her will, the water in 100 meters began to form a thin but incredibly resistant film, covering an area of 100 meters. Asterion sighed with relief as he felt the atmosphere calm down, at least inside the dome created by Saddlemelic. Hearing the sound of wings flapping next to him, the Black Patriarch looked up to see an apparently very tired dragon flying around Ancalagon. Riding the dragon, Luna waved at him with a tired and very exhausted expression. Apparently, even her magical energy was almost depleted, showing that she had had to use a lot of magic to protect herself. Asti, I don't know about you, but when I meet Dumbledore, I'm going to make him regret being born into this world. He'll see the power of a seer when we get angry. I swear he won't sit in a chair safely. I promise pain and anger for that old man. Luna commented with an exhausted tone on top of the dragon, the girl's eyes practically screaming with vengeance. The hatred for Dumbledore in her eyes was louder than ever. In this damned race she had only suffered and gained nothing. In the desert, she was chased by 3 dragons. In the sea she almost died because of a huge water spout. By the time she reached the 3rd part of the race, she would probably die. Asterion pursed his lips at Luna's words. The girl had really suffered a lot in this dragon race. Let's try to find Rose and find the portal to the 3rd part of the race. Luna nodded and muttered to herself. Just you wait, Dumbledore, your ass won't come out intact in the face of my wrath. Ignoring Luna's grumble, Asterion controlled Saddlemelech, and while both dragons moved away from the site near the water spout, the water dome made by Saddlemelech followed them both, driving away the strong winds and the cutting water at those speeds wherever it went. 10 kilometers away from the water spout, Asterion cancelled Saddlemelech's invocation and the water dome broke apart, exposing him and Luna once again to the strong winds and splashing water that hurt worse than knife cuts. Luna felt very upset by the dampness all over her body. The clothes stuck to her body, making her extremely uncomfortable. She had decided she hated rain with all her might from that moment on. And she began to hate Dumbledore even more for letting her suffer this sadistic torture while the man sat comfortably in his chair drinking a cup of tea to warm himself on the cold night. Suddenly, Luna noticed Asterion trying to talk to her with signs. Let's go. Find Rose. And go to some island. Luna muttered to herself, trying to decipher Asterion's signals in the middle of the darkness and in the middle of a bloody storm. She showed an OK sign and controlled her dragon with the reins to move further away from the storm above her. Asterion made Ancalagon overtake Luna's dragon and took the lead without a second thought, making Juan's dragon surf through the vacuum created by Ancalagon. Luna noticed this and showed a grateful expression, only she knew how tired the poor dragon beneath her was getting. She stroked the dragon's scales and spoke in a low, gentle tone. I'm sorry for forcing you to take part in this, but when we're done, I promise I'll find the best dragon breeding reserve with the most beautiful female dragons in the world so you can have a huge harem. Chapter 210 On the Night of the Storm. 3. Rose looked to the side as her blue eyes seemed to glow in the darkness of the stormy night. The lightning that bathed the sea made her feel nothing but very noisy. Apart from that, she was really enjoying riding a dragon in such a violent storm. It was like being on a roller coaster, only much more dangerous and exciting. If I were a portal in the sea, where would I be? Rose muttered to herself as she looked around with a thoughtful expression. Sound of thunder. With the deafening sound making her whole body shake, Rose felt her vision blurred by the intense glare as she smelled ozone in the air along with a ferrous taste in her mouth. A bolt of lightning had passed dangerously close to her. If she had been 5 meters to the left, the lightning would have struck her full on without any mercy. She would have been fine, Limitless would have protected her automatically, but Oberon would have been in serious trouble. Dragons were not lightning-proof, which easily had millions of volts, a voltage capable of killing anything in the flesh. Put aside the search for the portal and focus on finding an island, then find Asterion and Luna. Rose muttered to herself again as she brushed away the hair stuck to her face, obstructing her vision which was already badly affected by the storm and the darkness of the night. Although she said it, Rose discovered that it was easier said than done. How in Merlin's name could she find an island in the middle of a storm at night and risk her dragon being killed at any moment by a bolt of lightning? In short, she was fucked. and she didn't mean it in a good way, at least that's how Daphne put it. Suddenly, Rose's eyes caught the red lightning tearing through the dark night, which contrasted sharply against the dark surroundings. From the red beam, she noticed the magical aura that belonged to Asterion, her fiancé. A very visible sign, fortunately it's only us in the second part of the race. Rose commented as she controlled Oberon, heading towards Asterion's magical aura. She could imagine the skies full of dragons, all fighting among themselves as they tried to kill each other while in the middle of a storm. It would be real pandemonium. They needed to find the second portal quickly and get to the third and final part of the race before chaos broke out in the sea below them. After a short trip on the dragon, Rose spotted two figures flying low, dangerously close to the huge waves, which would easily sink a medium-sized boat without too much difficulty. She quickly identified Ancalagon and Luna's dragon, the former flying ahead while the smaller dragon followed behind, taking advantage of the vacuum provided by the larger dragon. It was a good strategy to conserve the dragon's energy. Rose commanded Oberon to descend and stood next to Ancalagon, essentially creating a formation that resembled a triangle. Asterion wasn't surprised by Rose's arrival. When she entered his detection field, he had already sensed the girl before. He quickly made a few signals to Rose, who responded just as quickly with her hands. "No island nearby." Asterion muttered Rose's reply. This gave him a headache. It was as if the second part of the race had no safe harbor, just like the desert oases, which increased the difficulty a lot, especially with Luna's dragon getting more and more tired with the continuous flight without breaks. Rose had also deciphered Asterion's hand signals and was equally helpless. Because of him, she already knew the situation Luna was in. Potions don't work on dragons. Even if she gave some to Luna's dragon, it would at most be like drinking water for the dragon. The rate of blood pumping and the colossal amount of blood in dragons was simply too different from humans. While humans only needed one vial of potion to have an effect, to have a similar effect on a dragon it would have to be a vial the size of 5 meters high. Such a quantity of potions could easily provide stamina potions for a month or two in any store in Diagon Alley. Asterion and Rose looked at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's eyes, then a thought crossed their minds at the same time. If there is no safe haven, what's stopping them from making one? Asterion quickly did what he needed to do, summoned Saddlemelech Albus again and made her control the seawater, creating a huge platform 100 meters long. In the next second, a blue beam emerged from the tip of Rose's wand and the entire water platform was frozen in an instant. All the ice seemed especially resistant, something Rose did on purpose. She also began to transfigure the entire platform, making it even stronger and more resistant, as well as malleable. Under Saddlemelech's control, she lowered the ice platform into the stormy sea, splashing water everywhere. Luna, knowing what this was all about, quickly made her dragon land on the ice platform while she used what little magic remained inside her to create walls on all 4 sides of the platform, playing her part in saving Asterion and Rose's magical energy. The poor dragon fell heavily onto the ice platform and didn't move, completely exhausted from all the flying so far. No one could blame him. He had already done something that many dragons couldn't, stand in front of a water spout and remain firm. Luna, despite the weakness in her limbs from magical exhaustion, leaned on her own dragon and breathed heavily as Rose poured a whole bottle of a stamina potion and a magical energy recovery potion. Luna's face contorted at the extremely bitter taste of both potions. She looked at Rose with a childish expression and asked hopefully, "Do you have any strawberry-flavored ones?" Rose smiled and replied with an evil expression, They all taste worse than you can imagine. Luna's face turned grim at such bad news. Suddenly, the pale blonde-haired girl found herself sliding down another edge of the ice shelf, including her dragon. Just as she thought she would hit the ice walls she had conjured up, the platform suddenly tilted the other way, causing Luna and the dragon to slide to the other side of the ice platform. Luna's face turned pale and her stomach churned with a strong feeling of nausea. She put her hand to her mouth and swallowed the stomach fluid that threatened to come out of her mouth. After the sensation passed, Luna lay down on the ice platform without bothering to slide from side to side. "I hate Dumbledore," Luna commented aloud without hiding her resentment towards the Hogwarts principal. If there was a favorable rating above her head, Dumbledore would have 100 with Luna. Finally, Luna's dragon regained some strength and dug its claws into the platform, holding itself in place, something Luna thanked Merlin for and leaned on the dragon. Ancalagon and Oberon were fixed in place with the same method used while Asterion and Rose got back on their respective dragons as the whole ice platform swayed from side to side. "What are we going to do?" "Luna is recovering while it will take a while for her dragon to fly again." Rose spoke, her voice tinged with subtle concern. The longer they lingered in this place, the more the other participants might arrive for the second part of the race, and when that happened, it would be a dragon war in the middle of a storm. Something she wanted to avoid if possible. Asterion knew this, but there was nothing he could do until Luna and her dragon had fully recovered. Until that happened, they couldn't go to the second portal. "We'll wait a while, but our priority is to find the second portal." Asterion put aside these worries and focused on finding the portal, something they had to find as soon as possible. Rose frowned and replied in a confused voice, "I tried to locate the portal, but there was nothing, not even a piece of rock in the sea. We don't have a clue as obvious as the oases in the desert." "Obvious?" Asterion muttered that word, thinking it was the key to finding the second portal. As Rose had said, the direction of the first portal was obvious: just head north with the help of the Ursa Minor constellation. In theory, the second part of the race should be similar, but there were no stars above them because of the storm and no islands apparently created as well as the artificial oases. "Obvious, obvious, obvious." Asterion muttered as he looked at the storm clouds above him and the water spout receding into the horizon. "Wait a minute. The water spout!" Asterion exclaimed as he looked towards the giant tube of water connecting sky and sea with the primordial fury of nature. Hearing Asterion's shout, Rose wasn't slow to understand her future husband's thoughts, yet she couldn't help cursing loudly. Fuck, Dumbledore wouldn't be crazy to put the second portal in the water spout. The more she thought about it, the more she was sure that the second portal was inside the water spout. Luna's face was even more bitter. The second portal was more like a sorting line to separate the strong from the weak for the finish line. Unfortunately, she was on the side of the weak. Next chapter, second volume, Chapter 210 on the night of the storm. 3. Chapter 211 on the night of the storm. 4. Chapter 212 on the night of the storm. 5. Chapter 213 at the highest point of heaven, END Dragon Race. Chapter 214 The Spark of Chaos. 1. Chapter 215 The Spark of Chaos. 2. Chapter 216 The Spark of Chaos. 3. Chapter 217 The Spark of Chaos. 4. Chapter 218 Ancient Artifact. 1. Chapter 219 Ancient Artifact. 2. Chapter 220 The Last Moment Before Chaos. 1. Chapter 221 The Last Moment Before Chaos. 2. Chapter 222 The Labyrinth of Gnosis. 1. Chapter 223 The Labyrinth of Gnosis, 2. Chapter 224 The Labyrinth of Gnosis, 3. Next chapter of the third volume, Chapter 225 A Dark Day, 1. Chapter 226 A Dark Day, 2. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe this channel and like this video.